Welcome to the Nerdjacker's Vault. Today we are reading Volume 1 of the Works of Han Feizi by the Chinese legalist philosopher Han Feizi, translated by W.K. Liao and Syed Mahdi Hassan. Book 1, Chapter 1. The First Interview with the King of Qin, a Memorial. Your servant has heard, who knows not but speaks is not wise, who knows but speaks not is not loyal. Any minister, if not loyal, must be condemned to death. If what he speaks be not true, he must be condemned to death, too. However, your servant begs to speak all he has heard, and entreats your majesty to convict him of whatever crime. Your servant has heard, all under heaven are forming the perpendicular union by uniting with Kiao in the center, Yen in the north, and Wei in the south, confederating with Qing, securing the goodwill of Qi, and also conjoining Han, with a view to facing the west and thereby forcibly causing Qin difficulties. At such a measure, your servant is laughing within himself. While there are in the world 3 causes of ruin, the Allies exemplify all of them. If they are said to be exemplifying all the causes of ruin, it is because of their conspiracy against Qin. About the causes of ruin, your servant has heard the saying, a misgoverned country attacking a well-governed country will go to ruin. A wicked country attacking an upright country will go to ruin. And a country defying the course of nature, when it attacks a country following the course of nature, will go to ruin. At present, the treasuries and armories of the Allies are not full. Their granaries and storehouses are empty. With all their gentry and commoners enlisted, there can be massed troops counting by hundreds of thousands. Among them, those who would bow their heads, wear feather head dresses, assume the office of commanders, with a decisive forethought to die fighting, number more than 1,000. While they all avow their determination to die, in case of emergency, even pulled by naked blades in the front and pushed by axes and anvils from behind, they would run backward and never fight to the death. Not that the gentry and commoners cannot fight to the death, but that their superiors are not capable of making them do so. For rewards are not bestowed as promised, nor are punishments inflicted as announced. Since reward and punishment are of no faith, their gentry and commoners would never fight to the death. Now Qin issues verbal commands and written orders, and carries out rewards and punishments accordingly. Both men of merit and of no merit are clearly distinguished from each other. Therefore, though the people have never seen any bandits since they left their parents' bosoms and lapels, once the news of hostilities reaches their ears, everywhere are found men tapping their feet and baring their arms to rush against sharp blades and step upon the charcoal of burning furnaces with a decisive forethought to die fighting. Verily, in time of crisis, readiness to die and resolution to live are not the same. Yet the people of Qin alone dare all hazards in the cause of their country, for they respect courageous death. Indeed, one man resolved to die a courageous death can overcome 10 enemies afraid of death. 10 brave men can overcome 100 coward enemies. 100 brave men can overcome 1,000 coward enemies. 1,000 brave men can overcome 10,000 coward enemies, and 10,000 brave men can subdue all under heaven. In these days, Qin has a territory, which, if the wider places are cut off to fill up the narrower places, extends over several thousand square li, plus a famous army counting by tens of thousands. In regard to the rewards and punishments carried out by her commands and orders, as well as the advantages and disadvantages presented by her topographical features, no other country in all under heaven can be compared to her. On coping with the world in the light of such gains, she can accomplish more than the conquest of all under heaven and can easily hold them at her feet. Thus, Qin in warfare has never failed to win, in attack has never failed to take, and whatever has stood in her way she has never failed to smash, having opened up a vast land stretching several thousand li. This has been her great achievement. However, of late, so dull are her weapons and armor growing, So ill are her gentry and commoners becoming, so scanty are her savings and hoardings become, so fallow are her fields and arable lands resting, so empty are her granaries and storehouses, that her neighboring feudal lords do not obey her, and the title of hegemonic ruler is not as yet secured. For such there is no other reason than this. Her state councillors, all in all, do not exert their spirit of loyalty. Your servant dares to speak. In times gone by, Qi in the south routed Qing, in the east routed Sung, in the west subdued Qin, in the north routed Yen, and in the center put Han and Wei to use. Thus with vast territory and strong soldiers she won in warfare and took in attack, thus becoming able to enforce her edicts and decrees throughout all under heaven. Of Qi, the limpid Qi stream and the muddy yellow river suffice to make boundaries, the long walls and the large dikes suffice to make frontiers. Therefore, in 5 successive wars was Qi victorious. Later, because of only one war she failed to win, Qi was reduced to impotency. From this viewpoint, it is clear that warfare is always a life or death question to the ruler of 10,000 chariots. Besides, your servant has heard the saying, on removing traces, leave no root, and be no neighbor to any catastrophe. There shall then survive no catastrophe. Well, Qin in the war with the Qings routed them by long odds, and made such a surprise attack upon the city of Ying and the districts of Tungting, Wutu, and Qiangnan, that the ruler and ministers of Qing had a narrow escape and sought refuge eastward under the protection of Chen. At that moment, if with her forces Qin closely pursued the Qings, the Qing state could be taken. After the state was taken, the people would become covetable and the territory fruitful to Qin, so that in the east Qin could thereby weaken Qi and Yen, and in the center devastate the 3 Qins. If so, at one stroke she could secure the title of hegemonic ruler and lay all the neighboring feudal lords under tribute. Instead, her state councillors led the troops in retreat, and what was worse, made peace with the Qings, allowed them to recover the ruined country, gather the scattered masses, reinstate the spirits of land and grain on the altar, and rebuild their ancestral shrines, and let them lead all under heaven to face the west and cause Qin difficulties. This, no doubt, was the first time the way to hegemony was lost. Another time, when all under heaven formed a wicked alliance and entrenched their forces at the foot of Mount Hua, His Majesty, by virtue of his own edicts, ordered the army to rout them. The soldiers marched as far as the outer walls of Liang. The city of Liang, after being besieged for several tens of days, could be captured. Were Liang captured, the Wei state might fall. Should Wei be taken, the friendly contact between Chao and Qing would come to an end. If the friendly contact between Chao and Qing ceased, Chao would fall into peril. Should Chao fall into peril, Qing would become helpless. So that in the east, Qin could weaken Qi and Yen, and in the center hold down the 3 Qins. At one stroke she could secure the title of hegemonic ruler and lay all her neighboring feudal lords under tribute. Instead, her state councillors led the troops in retreat, and what was worse, made peace with the Weis, allowed them to recover the ruined country, gather the scattered masses, reinstate the spirits of land and grain on the altar, and rebuild their ancestral shrines, and let them lead all under heaven to face the west and cause Qin difficulties. This, no doubt, was the second time the way to hegemony was lost. In the days of old, Marquis Xiang, while governing Qin, used the soldiers of one country to perform meritorious services for 2. As a result, the soldiers of Qin were lifelong exposed afield. Gentry and commoners were tired and ill at home, while His Majesty never secured the title of hegemonic ruler. This, no doubt, was the third time the way to hegemony was lost. The Chao clan, indeed, holds the central state inhabited by heterogeneous populations. Their people are frivolous and hard to rule. Their rewards and punishments are of no faith. Their topographical features are not advantageous. and their superiors are unable to exert the people's best. Assuredly, these are symptoms of a doomed state. Yet, not concerned about the welfare of the masses, they dared to mobilize their gentry and commoners, entrench their forces in the suburbs of Changping, and thereby contested with Qin the districts of Shangtang and Han. Thereupon His Majesty, by virtue of his own edicts, ordered the army to rout them and captured Wuhan. At that moment, among the Chaos, high and low were not mutually attached. The noble and the humble had no faith in each other. Naturally, Hantan could not hold out long. Should Qin take Hantan, occupy Shantung and Hochien, and lead her troops on the march westward to fall upon Shuwu, cross the Yangchang ascent and subject Tai and Shangtang, then without a single cuirass used and without any gentry or commoners afflicted, the 36 counties of Tai plus the 17 counties of Shangtang would all become Qin's possessions. After Tai and Shangtang had fallen into the hands of Qin without fighting, Tungyang and Howai would also without fighting fall into the hands of Qi, while the territory to the north of Central Hills and the river Hudo into the hands of Yen. In consequence, Cao would give way. Without Cao, Han would fall. Without Han, neither Qing nor Wei could stand by itself. If Qing and Wei could not stand alone, then at one effort Qin could break Han, encroach upon Wei, and capture Qing, whereby to weaken Qi and Yen in the east, and break up the White Horse Ford, whereby to flood the Wei clan. As a result, the three Qins would fall. The Unionists would fail, and His Majesty might, with clothes dropped and hands folded, wait for all under heaven to give way and easily secure the title of hegemonic ruler. Instead, the state councilors led the troops in retreat and, what was worse, made peace with the chaos. Thus, notwithstanding the intelligence of His Majesty and the strength of the Qin soldiers, the plan for hegemony was discarded. No inch of territory but insults by a doomed state was gained, which was altogether due to the incompetence of the state councilors. Indeed, Cao, doomed to ruin, did not go to ruin. Qin, deserving hegemony, did not attain hegemony. This was the first reason why all under heaven came to penetrate the ability of Qin's state councilors. Again, when Qin marched out all her officers and soldiers to launch a fresh attack upon Hantan, her men failed to take that city, threw away their armor and crossbows, withdrew, and shivered. This was the second reason why all under heaven came to penetrate the strength of Qin. Meanwhile, they drew out in retreat and held their breath in the suburbs of Lixia, whereupon His Majesty arrived with newly gathered forces. They then started new engagements but could not win. As their supplies stopped coming along, they had to leave the front line. This was the third reason why all under heaven came to penetrate the strength of Qin. Thus, in the past, they penetrated the ability of Qin's state councilors at home and wore out her military strength abroad. From this viewpoint, your servant believes that the union of all under heaven has practically had no obstacle. Now that, inside Qin, armor and weapons are growing dull, gentry and commoners are falling ill, savings and hoardings are becoming scanty, and fields and arable lands are resting fallow, granaries and storehouses are standing empty. Outside Qin, all under heaven are very firmly allied against her. Would to your Majesty that there be concerns of mind about such a crisis. Besides, your servant has heard the saying, be alarmed and trembling and act more carefully day after day. If you act carefully in due manner, you mayest hold all under heaven under your sway. How to prove this? Well, in days of yore, Cao, being the son of heaven, commanded hundreds of thousands of troops of all under heaven, with the left flank of his army draining the rivulet Qi, and the right flank draining the rivulet Huan, till the water of the Qi was used up and the water of the Huan ran no longer. Thereby he intended to cause King Wu of Chou difficulties. Commanding only 3,000 troops, all clad in white armor, King Wu in one day's battle broke up the state of Cao, took him prisoner, occupied his territory and subdued his subjects, whereas none in the world ever grieved over the event. Likewise, Earl Qi once led the forces of 3 countries to attack Viscount Xiang of Chao at Qinyang. By cutting down the Qin stream and thereby inundating the city for 3 months, he brought the city to the verge of downfall. Thereupon Viscount Xiang bored a tortoise shell, counted bamboo slips, divined by casting lots with them, and found omens on the shell foretelling the gains and losses, whereby he chose the country he should surrender to. Meanwhile, he sent out his envoy named Chang Mengtan, who wormed through the water and stole out of the city. He turned down the covenant Earl Qi had made with the other 2 countries and won the forces of the latter to his views. With their aid, he fell upon Earl Qi, took him prisoner, and restored to Viscount Xiang the original territory. In these days, Qin has a territory which, if the wider places are cut off to fill up the narrower places, extends over several thousand square li, plus a famous army counting by hundreds of thousands. In regard to the rewards and punishments carried out by her commands and orders, as well as the advantages and disadvantages presented by her topographical features, no other country in all under heaven can be compared to her. On coping with the world in the light of such gains, she can conquer and hold all under heaven at her feet. Therefore your servant has, in the face of the death penalty, prayed to have an audience of your majesty, and speak of the right way, whereby to break up the perpendicular union of all under heaven, to take Chao and ruin Han, to subject Qing and Wei, to befriend Qi and Yen, in order thereby to secure the title of hegemonic ruler, and lay all the neighboring feudal lords under tribute. May your majesty therefore lend ear to this memorial. Should at one effort the perpendicular union not be broken, Cao not taken, Han not ruined, Qing and Wei not subjected, Qi and Yen not befriended, the title of hegemonic ruler not secured, and all the neighboring feudal lords not laid under tribute, would your majesty behead your servant as a warning to the whole country on a charge of disloyal counsel to the sovereign? Chapter 2. On the preservation of Han, issue between Han Fei and Li Su, Han Feizi's memorial to the king of Qin. Han has served Qin for upwards of 30 years. To Qin she has formed a shielding barrier in case of war and made a restful carpet in time of peace. Thus, whenever Qin sends out crack troops to conquer new territory, and Han follows at her heels, Han incurs hatred from all under heaven, but every achievement belongs to Qin. Further, since Han pays tribute and renders services to Qin, she does not differ from a district or county of Qin. Of late, however, your servant has in secret heard of the scheme of your majesty's ministers to raise an army to invade Han. Verily, it is the chaos that have been recruiting officers and soldiers and supporting the advocates of the perpendicular union with a view to uniting the troops of all under heaven. And, with the clear understanding that unless Qin be weakened, the feudal lords would eventually see their ancestral shrines ruined, they plan to turn west and accomplish their task. This is not such a scheme as could be devised in the brief space of one day. Now supposing Qin left the impending harm Chao has been causing and spurned Han, so trustworthy a vassal as a eunuch, then all under heaven would accordingly find reason for the scheme of the Chaos. Verily Han is a small country. To stand the pressure by all under heaven from the 4 directions, the sovereign has to bear disgrace, and the ministers have to undergo hardships, high and low, having thus for years shared griefs with each other in mending garrisons, in making provision against strong foes, in keeping hoardings and savings, and in building walls and moats, in order to solidify their defense works. Therefore, though Qin starts invading Han now, she may be unable to take her in a year. Should Qin withdraw after taking only a city, she would fall into contempt by all under heaven, who might in their turn crush her soldiers. Again, should Han rebel, Wei would join her and Cao would look to Qi for safety. If so, Qin will eventually supply Chao with the strength of Han and Wei, and let Qi unite all these powers to solidify the perpendicular union and thereby struggle for supremacy with Qin. The result would be Chao's fortune and Qin's misfortune, come what might. Indeed, if Qin on going forward to raid Chao cannot take, and on turning backward to attack Han cannot win, her troops, however invulnerable, will become tired of field operations abroad, and her transport corps will fall short of supplies from home. Then, if Qin masses her distressed and weakened troops to cope with the 20,000 chariots of Qi and Chao, the result will not go in accordance with the original plan to destroy Han. Thus, if everything be done according to the scheme of your Majesty's ministers, Qin will infallibly become the anvil of the forces of all under heaven. Wherefore, even though your Majesty's reign may last as long as metals and rocks, there never will come the day to bring the world under one rule. Now, it is the stupid suggestion of your humble servant to send an envoy to Qing, and by bribing the ministers in charge of her state affairs with precious presents, convince them of the reasons why Chao has been conspiring against Qin, and at the same time send a hostage to Wei to make her feel at ease, and then to fall upon Chao. Consequently, Chao will not make any serious trouble in spite of her confederation with Qi. After the removal of the difficulties with these two countries, Qi and Chao, the problem of Han can be solved by means of an official dispatch. Likewise, if we can at one effort doom the two countries to ruin, Qing and Wei will voluntarily surrender themselves to us. Hence the saying, weapons are dangerous implements, and should not be employed at random. For illustration, Qin in vying with Chao has to challenge Qi and simultaneously break off with Han, while she is as yet unsuccessful in winning the goodwill of Qing and Wei, so that once she fails to win in a single combat, she will certainly suffer a tremendous adversity. Verily, schemes are means whereby affairs are settled, and therefore should be carefully scrutinized. The turning point of Qin, whether towards strength or towards weakness, will come to pass within this year. It is, indeed, a long time since Chao began to plot with other feudal lords against Qin. It will be a catastrophe to be defeated by the feudal lords in the first engagement with them. Again, it is a great risk to devise such a scheme as would excite the feudal lord's suspicion. Exposing these two carelessnesses to the world is not the right way to display our strength before the feudal lords. Therefore, with due reverence, may your humble servant pray your Majesty to ponder over such eventualities and foresee that should the expedition against Han be utilized by the perpendicular Unionists, it would be too late to regret the consequences. Li Shu's Memorial to the King of Qin. Under His Majesty's edict, the memorial submitted by the envoy from Han, in which he maintained that Han should not be taken, was handed down to your servant, Shu. Your servant, Shu, however, considers the viewpoint presented therein extremely fallacious. What stomach and heart diseases are to man, that is Han to Qin. The man having stomach and heart diseases ordinarily only feels like standing in the mud which is sticky and cannot be brushed off. But as soon as he starts running fast, the trouble becomes serious. Similarly, Han, though she pays homage to Qin, is a constant menace to Qin. At the news of any kind of hostilities, she cannot be trusted. Vying with Chao, Qin has sent Qingsu to Qi. Nobody is yet able to foretell the outcome. From your servant's viewpoint, it remains uncertain whether the friendship of Qi and Chao will be broken by the mission of Qingsu. Should it remain unbroken, Qin would have to exert all her forces to cope with the 20,000 chariots. To be sure, Han has yielded not to Qin's kindness, but to her strength. As soon as we move our forces against Qi and Chao, Han will make trouble as stomach and heart diseases do. Besides, if Han and Qing have any conspiracy against Qin and other feudal lords respond to it, Qin is then bound to encounter another humiliation as met at the fort of Mount Yao. Fei came here most probably with the intention to elevate his own position in the Han government by demonstrating his ability to save the Han state. By means of eloquent speeches and beautiful phrases, he embellishes lies and falsifies plots in order thereby to fish for advantages from Qin and watch your Majesty's mind on behalf of Han. Indeed, if the friendship of Qin and Han becomes intimate, Fei will be esteemed, which is his self-seeking scheme. Having found Fei in his memorial twisting so many beguiling contentions and showing his sophistic ability to the utmost, your servant is afraid, lest your Majesty should be bewildered by his eloquence and listen to his crooked viewpoint, and consequently neglect the consideration of the actual conditions. Now your servant has devised a stupid scheme as follows. Suppose Qin sends out troops without announcing the object of the expedition. Then the ministers in charge of Han's state affairs will consider serving Qin a good policy. Then your servant will ask for your Majesty's permission to interview the King of Han and make him come to visit your Majesty. When he comes, your Majesty retains him and never sends him away, but instead summons a few important ministers from the Han government and make bargains with them. In consequence, we will be able to encroach upon Han farther inside. After that, if your Majesty similarly orders Meng Wu to dispatch the garrisons of the eastern districts to guard against enemy troops along the border without announcing their objective, the Qis will fear surprise invasion and accept the proposal of Qing Su. As a result, before our forces march outside the boundary, we will capture Han, while Qi will yield to our pressure. As soon as such news spreads among the feudal lords, the Qiao clan will be struck with terror, while the Qings will be in doubt how to act, and eventually decide to remain loyal to Qin. If the Qings make no move at all, Wei will not be sufficient to cause worries, so that we will be able to encroach upon the territories of the feudal lords in the way silkworms eat mulberry leaves, and cope with the forces of Qiao. May your Majesty ponder deliberately over the scheme of your stupid servant with no hesitation? Qin accordingly sent Su to the court of Han. Li Shu went to interview the king of Han, but could not have an audience of him. Therefore he sent in a memorial saying, "Of old, when Qin and Han combined their forces and united their purposes to refrain from invading each other, nobody in the whole world dared to aggress. Such a situation lasted for several generations. Some time ago, when the 5 feudal lords sent a joint expedition against Han, Qin sent out troops to rescue her. Han being a central state, her territory scarcely stretches 1,000 li. Thanks to the traditional policy she has pursued from generation to generation to serve Qin, she has been able to occupy an equal position among the feudal lords in all under heaven. Another time, however, when the 5 feudal lords launched a joint attack upon Qin, Han in her turn joined them and stood at the front of the allied line to meet the forces of Qin beneath the pass of the Armor Gorge. With their armies worn out and their strength exhausted, the feudal lords were compelled to cease hostilities. When Tutsang was premier of Qin, he mobilized soldiers and dispatched generals to revenge the wrong of the allies and attacked Qing first. The chancellor of Qing, feeling uneasy about it, said, "Han at first regarded Qin as unjust, and yet kept fraternal terms with Qin in order jointly to menace the rest of the world. Then she betrayed Qin and took the lead of the allied forces in storming the pass. Thus, centrally located, Han is so fickle that nobody knows what she is going to do next." Thereupon the allies ceded to Qin 10 cities from the best districts of Han as an apology for their wrong, and thereby ceased hostilities. Thus, ever since Han turned against Qin, the country has been oppressed, her territory invaded, and her army weakened till the present day. The reason, therefore, is Her rulers have been listening to the flippant theories of wicked ministers, but have never considered actual conditions. Even if the wicked ministers be put to death, it would be impossible for Han to recover her former strength. At present, Chao is massing officers and soldiers with Qin as target. Therefore, she has sent envoys to Han to borrow the way through the country on the pretext of attacking Qin. Indeed, in her campaign against Qin, she will naturally invade Han first and Qin next. Besides, your servant has heard, when the lips are gone, the teeth are cold. Verily, Qin and Han have to share the same hazard, and such an eventuality is now visible enough. Formerly, when Wei was about to dispatch troops to attack Han, Qin ordered guards to escort her goodwill envoys to Han. Now your servant, Shu, is sent here by the king of Qin. He is not granted an audience. Therefore he is afraid the present chamberlains of your majesty have inherited the scheme of the former wicked ministers, and might once more cause Han territorial losses. If your servant Shu is granted no audience while here and has to go home to report to His Majesty the King of Qin on his mission, the relations between Qin and Han will certainly be severed. On this mission, Shu came to present the goodwill of His Majesty the King of Qin to the court of Han, and hopes to make the best plan for your Majesty, which in no wise constitutes sufficient reason for your Majesty's according your humble servant such a cold reception as this. Your servant, Shu, has petitioned for an audience only to present his stupid counsels inside the court, and then to be chopped into inches to death outside the court. Thereon may your Majesty deliberate. Now supposing your Majesty executed your servant in Han, it would not do your Majesty any good. Moreover, since your Majesty turns no ear to your servant's counsels, there will be fostered the seed of catastrophes. For once Qin marches her troops out without stopping, Han will then feel concern for the safety of her altar of the spirits of land and grain. After your servant, Su, has had his corpse exposed in the marketplace in the capital of Han, though your Majesty might begin to think about your servant's stupid but loyal counsels, it would be impossible to prevent disaster. After the frontiers have been raided and only the defense work of the capital is held, and when the sounds of drums and bells are filling up the ears, though your Majesty might then apply the counsels of your servant, Shu, it will be too late. Moreover, though the limits of Han's military strength are generally known throughout the world, she is now betraying Qin. Indeed, if cities are evacuated and troops defeated, rebels among the rear forces will infallibly raid the capital. When the capital falls, the civilians will scatter. When the civilians scatter, no more troops can be recruited. Even though the capital might be well defended, yet Qin would send out all her men to besiege the only city of your Majesty. When its communication with the outside world is cut off, it will be impossible to accomplish any scheme till the situation becomes unsavable. As the consideration of the whole situation by the chamberlains is not thorough, may your Majesty deliberate on it carefully. If what your servant Shu has said contains anything that does not coincide with actual facts, may your Majesty allow him to complete his memorial before the throne. After that it will not be too late to put him to death through official censure. The King of Qin neither indulges in drinking and eating, nor amuses himself with traveling and sightseeing, but is wholeheartedly scheming against Cao. Therefore he has sent your servant Shu here to speak on his behalf. Your servant has petitioned for a personal interview because he feels he must parley with your Majesty on matters of urgent importance. Now, if your Majesty grants no audience to your servant, the faith of Han never will be proved. Verily Qin will cease the campaign against Chao and move the army against Han. May your Majesty, therefore, kindly ponder over the matter again and again, and grant your servant a definite answer. Chapter 3. On the difficulty in speaking, a memorial. Your servant Fei is by no means diffident of speaking. as to why he has to hesitate in speaking. If his speeches are compliant and harmonious, magnificent and orderly, he is then regarded as ostentatious and insincere. If his speeches are sincere and courteous, straightforward and careful, he is then regarded as awkward and unsystematic. If his speeches are widely cited and subtly composed, frequently illustrated and continuously analogized, he is then regarded as empty and unpractical. If his speeches summarize minute points and present general ideas, being thus plain and concise, he is then regarded as simple and not discerning. If his speeches are very personally observing and well-versed in the inner nature of mankind, he is then regarded as self-assuming and self-conceited. If his speeches are erudite and profound, he is then regarded as boastful but useless. If his speeches touch the details of housekeeping and estimate each item in terms of numerals, he is then regarded as vulgar. If his speeches are too much concerned with worldly affairs and not offensive in wording, he is then regarded as a coward and a flatterer. If his speeches are far from commonplace and contrary to human experience, he is then regarded as fantastic. If his speeches are witty and eloquent and full of rhetorical excellences, he is then regarded as flippant. If he discards all literary forms of expression and speaks solely of the naked facts, he is then regarded as rustic. And should he quote the books of poetry and history from time to time and act on the teachings of the former sages, he is then regarded as a book chanter. These things explain the reason why your servant, Fei, is diffident in speaking and worried about speaking. Therefore, weights and measures, however accurate, are not always adopted. Doctrines and principles, however perfect, are not always practiced. Should His Majesty disbelieve the minister who speaks to the throne, the minister would be found guilty of a blunder or condemned to death. For example, Su Su schemed well but was killed by the king of Wu. Chung Ni taught well but was detained by the ruler of Kuang, and Kuan Yiwu was really worthy but was taken prisoner by the ruler of Lu. Not that these three statesmen were not worthy, but that the three rulers were not intelligent. In remote antiquity, when Tang was the sanest and Yi Yin the wisest of the age, though the wisest attempted to persuade the sanest, yet he was not welcomed even after 70 times of persuasion, till he had to handle pans and bowls and become a cook in order thereby to approach him and become familiar with him. In consequence, Tang came to know his worthiness and took him into service. Hence the saying, though the wisest man wants to persuade the sanest man, he is not necessarily welcomed upon his first arrival. Such was the case of Yi Yin's persuading Tang. Again the saying, though the wise man wants to persuade the fool, he is not necessarily listened to. Such was the case of King Wen's persuading Chao. Thus, just as King Wen attempted to persuade Chao and was put in jail, Marquis Er was broiled, Marquis Chu's corpse was dried, Pekan had his heart cut open, and Earl Mai's corpse was pickled. Furthermore, Ai Wu was bound with chains. Cao Qi absconded to Chen. Pai Li Tzu begged on his way to the capital of Qin. Fu Ye was sold into slavery from place to place. Sun Tzu had his feet cut off in Wei. Wu Qi wiped off his tears at Dike Gate, lamented over the impending cession of the western river districts to Qin, and was dismembered in Chu. Kung Shuzo spoke of a man fit to be a pillar of the state, but was regarded as unreasonable, so that Kung Sun Yang absconded to Qin. Quan Lung Peng was executed. Chang Hung had his intestines chopped into pieces. Yin Tzu was thrown into a trap among brambles. The minister of war, Tzu Chi, was killed and his corpse was floated on the Yangtze River. Tian Ming was stoned to death. Mi Tzu Chien and Shi Men Pao quarreled with nobody but were killed. Tung An Yu was killed and his corpse was exposed in the marketplace. Cai Yu had to suffer the disaster caused by Tian Chang. Fan Chu had his ribs broken in Wei. These tens of men were all benevolent, worthy, loyal, and upright persons in the world and followers of the right way and true path of life. Unfortunately, they met such unreasonable, violent, stupid, and crooked masters and lost their lives in the long run. Then, why could these worthies and sages escape death penalties and evade disgrace? It was because of the difficulty in persuading fools. Hence every gentleman has to remain diffident of speaking. Even the best speech displeases the ear and upsets the heart and can be appreciated only by worthy and sage rulers. May your Majesty therefore ponder over this memorial of your servant. Chapter 4. On favorite vassals. A memorial. Favorite vassals, if too intimate with the ruler, would cause him personal danger. Ministers, if too powerful, would overturn the august position of the sovereign. Wives and concubines, if without distinction of rank, would cause legitimate sons dangers. Brothers, if not subservient to the ruler, would endanger the altar of the spirits of land and grain. Your servant has heard. The ruler of 1,000 chariots, if not on his guard, would find close by him vassals of 100 chariots, aiming to shake his authority and upset his country. The ruler of 10,000 chariots, if not on his guard, would find close by him vassals of 1,000 chariots, aiming to shake his authority and upset his country. That being so, wicked ministers can multiply while the sway of the sovereign declines. Therefore, the territorial expansion of the feudal lords leads to the damnation of the Son of Heaven. The extraordinary wealth of ministers leads to the downfall of the ruler. Hence, generals and ministers who would leave the sovereign's interests behind and prosper the welfare of their own families instead should be ousted by the ruler of men. Nothing is more valuable than the royal person, more honorable than the throne, more powerful than the authority of the sovereign, and more august than the position of the ruler. These four excellences are not obtained from outside, nor secured from anybody else, but are deliberated in the ruler's own mind and acquired thereby. Hence the saying, "The Lord of men, if unable to exercise his equipment with the four excellences, is bound to end his life in exile." This the ruler of men must keep firmly in mind. Of old, the ruin of Chao and the fall of Chou were both due to the territorial expansion of the feudal lords. The partition of Qin as well as the usurpation of Qi was due to the extraordinary wealth of ministers. So were the regicides in Yen and Sung, indeed. Thus, whether in the cases of Yin and Chou, or in the cases of Qin and Qi, or in the modern cases of Yen and Sung, the same reason never failed to hold true. For this reason, the intelligent ruler, in keeping officials in service, exhausts their abilities with laws and corrects their errors with measures. Hence no release from the death penalty, no remission of punishment. Both release from the death penalty and remission of punishment, being called authority losing on the part of the ruler, mark the fall of the altar of the spirits of land and grain into danger, as well as the shifting of the state under the deflected authority of the wicked ministers. Therefore, no minister, however large his bounty may be, should be allowed to include the capital city in his private fief, nor should he be allowed, however numerous his adherents and supporters may be, to subject officers and soldiers as personal vassals. Accordingly, no official while serving the state should be allowed to have any private governmental office. While in the army, nobody should be allowed to cultivate personal friendships. No official should be allowed to make any loan from the public treasury to individual families. This is the way the intelligent ruler should forbid wicked practices. For the same reason, no minister should be allowed to have a 4-horse chariot as personal escort, nor should he be allowed to carry any kind of weapons. If anyone, being neither a public courier nor a herald of urgent messages, transport implements of war from place to place, he should be condemned to death without mercy. This is the way the intelligent ruler should provide against accidents. Chapter 5. The Tao of the sovereign Tao is the beginning of the myriad things, the standard of right and wrong. That being so, the intelligent ruler, by holding to the beginning, knows the source of everything, and by keeping to the standard, knows the origin of good and evil. Therefore, by virtue of resting empty and reposed, he waits for the course of nature to enforce itself, so that all names will be defined of themselves and all affairs will be settled of themselves. Empty, he knows the essence of fullness. Reposed, he becomes the corrector of motion. Who utters a word creates himself a name. Who has an affair creates himself a form. Compare forms and names and see if they are identical. Then the ruler will find nothing to worry about, as everything is reduced to its reality. Hence the saying, the ruler must not reveal his wants. For if he reveals his wants, the ministers will polish their manners accordingly. The ruler must not reveal his views. For if he reveals his views, the ministers will display their hues differently. Hence another saying, if the like and hate of the ruler be concealed, the true hearts of the ministers will be revealed. If the experience and wisdom of the ruler be discarded, the ministers will take precautions. Accordingly, the ruler, wise as he is, should not bother, but let everything find its proper place. Worthy as he is, should not be self-assumed but observe closely the minister's motivating factors of conduct, and, courageous as he is, should not be enraged, but let every minister display his prowess. So leave the ruler's wisdom, then you will find the minister's intelligence. Leave the ruler's worthiness, then you will find the minister's merits. And leave the ruler's courage, then you will find the minister's strength. In such cases, ministers will attend to their duties, magistrates will have definite work routine, and everybody will be employed according to his special ability. Such a course of government is called constant and immutable. Hence the saying, so quiet it rests without footing, so vacant it cannot be located. Thus, the intelligent ruler does nothing, but his ministers tremble all the more. It is the Tao of the intelligent ruler that he makes the wise men exhaust their mental energy and makes his decisions thereby without being himself at his wit's end. That he makes the worthy men exert their talents and appoints them to office accordingly without being himself at the end of his ability. And that in case of merits the ruler gains the renown, and in case of demerit the ministers face the blame, so that the ruler is never at the end of his reputation. Therefore the ruler, even though not worthy, becomes the master of the worthies, and, even though not wise, becomes the corrector of the wise men. It is the ministers who do the toil. It is the ruler who gets the spoil. This is the everlasting principle of the worthy sovereign. Tao exists in invisibility, its function in unintelligibility. Be empty and reposed and have nothing to do. Then from the dark see defects in the light. See but never be seen. Hear but never be heard. Know but never be known. If you hear any word uttered, do not change it nor move it, but compare it with the deed and see if word and deed coincide with each other. Place every official with a censor. Do not let them speak to each other. Then everything will be exerted to the utmost. Cover tracks and conceal sources. Then the ministers cannot trace origins. Leave your wisdom and cease your ability. Then your subordinates cannot guess at your limitations. Keep your decision and identify it with the words and deeds of your subordinates. Cautiously take the handles and hold them fast. Uproot others' want of them. Smash others' thought of them, and do not let anybody covet them. If the ruler is not cautious of the locking, or if he does not keep the gate in good repair, the tiger will come into existence. If the ruler does not take precautions for his sway, or if he does not cover his realities, the traitor will make his appearance. Who murders the sovereign and takes his place, and finds the whole people side in awe with him, is called a tiger. Again, who serves the country by the sovereign's side, and watches for his secret faults with villainous motives, is called a traitor. Scatter his partisans, arrest his supporters, lock up the gate, and deprive him of all assistance. Then there will be no tiger in the country. Be too great to be measured, be too profound to be surveyed. identify norms and names, scrutinize laws and manners, and chastise those doing as they please. Then there will be no traitor in the country. For these reasons, the Lord of Men always has to face 5 kinds of delusion. Delusion by ministers impeding the sovereign, delusion by ministers controlling public resources and revenues, delusion by ministers issuing decrees at random, delusion by ministers distributing personal favors, and delusion by ministers feeding dependents. When ministers impede the sovereign loses his viewpoint. When they control public resources and revenues, he loses his advantages. When they issue decrees at random, he loses his ruling authority. When they distribute personal favors, he loses his name. When they feed their dependents, he loses his supporters. All their doings as such should be based on the initiative of the Lord of Men and should not be started by the ministers at their pleasure. The Tao of the Lord of Men regards tranquility and humility as treasures. Without handling anything himself, he can tell skillfulness from unskillfulness. Without his own concerns of mind, he can tell good from bad luck. Therefore, without uttering any word himself, he finds a good reply given. Without exerting his own effort, he finds his task accomplished. Whenever a reply is given to his question, he holds to its covenant. Whenever any task is accomplished, he holds to its result. And out of coincidence and discrepancy between the consequences of tasks accomplished and the covenants of words uttered, reward and punishment are born. Therefore, when a minister utters a word, the ruler should according to the word assign him a task to accomplish, and according to the result of the accomplishment call the task to account. If the result corresponds with the task and the task with the word, the minister should be rewarded. If the result corresponds not with the task and the task not with the word, he should be censured. It is in accordance with the Tao of the intelligent ruler that every minister should utter no word that corresponds not with its proper task. For this reason, the intelligent ruler, in bestowing rewards, is as benign as the seasonable rain that the masses profit by his graces. In inflicting punishments, he is so terrific like the loud thunder that even divines and sages cannot atone for their crimes. Thus the intelligent ruler neglects no reward and remits no punishment. For if reward is neglected, ministers of merit will relax their duties. If punishment is remitted, villainous ministers will become liable to misconduct. Therefore, men of real merit, however distant and humble, must be rewarded. Those of real demerit, however near and dear, must be censured. If both the reward of the distant and humble and the censure of the near and dear are infallible, the distant and humble will not go idle, while the near and dear will not turn arrogant. Chapter 6. Having Regulations, a Memorial. No country is permanently strong, nor is any country permanently weak. If conformers to law are strong, the country is strong. If conformers to law are weak, the country is weak. King Chuang of Qing annexed as many states as 26 and extended his territory as far as 3,000 li. As soon as King Chuang passed away from the altar of the spirits of land and grain, Qing decayed accordingly. Duke Huan of Qi annexed as many states as 30 and extended his territory as far as 3,000 li. As soon as Duke Huan passed away from the altar of the spirits of land and grain, Qi decayed accordingly. King Shang of Yen took the Yellow River as state boundary on the south, established the capital at Qi, doubled the defense works at Chou and Fangcheng, smashed the Qi state, and subdued the Central Hills state, in such wise that whoever was a friend of Yen was respected, and whoever was not a friend of Yen was despised. As soon as King Xiang passed away from the altar of the spirits of land and grain, Yen decayed accordingly. King Anli of Wei attacked Yen, rescued Chao, took the land to the east of the Yellow River, and completely conquered both Tao and Wei. Then he mobilized his troops into Qi and took the city of Pinglu to be his holiday resort. Then he attacked Han, took Quan, won the battle by the Qi River. Then in the engagement at Chuyang, he drove the worn-out troops of Qing into retreat. Finally, in the engagement at Shangchai and Chaoling, he routed the Qing troops. In this manner, he sent out his expeditionary forces in the 4 directions throughout all under heaven, and spread his influence all over the countries of crowns and girdles. Following the death of King Anli, Wei decayed accordingly. Thus, as long as King Chuang of Qing and Duke Huan of Qi were alive, Qing and Qi could remain hegemonic. As long as King Xiang of Yan and King Anli of Wei were alive, Yan and Wei remained strong. Now their countries all fell into decay, because their ministers and magistrates all followed the path to chaos and never sought for the way to order. Though their countries were chaotic, they cast aside the state laws and schemed for nothing but their own outside interests. This was the same as to suppress a fire by carrying firewood on the back. Consequently, confusion and weakness turned from bad to worse. Therefore, at present, any ruler able to expel private crookedness and uphold public law finds the people safe and the state in order, and any ruler able to expunge private action and act on public law finds his army strong and his enemy weak. So, find out men following the discipline of laws and regulations, and place them above the body of officials. Then the sovereign cannot be deceived by anybody with fraud and falsehood. Find out men able to weigh different situations, and put them in charge of distant affairs. Then the sovereign cannot be deceived by anybody in matters of world politics. Now supposing promotions were made because of mere reputations, then ministers would be estranged from the sovereign, and all officials would associate for treasonable purposes. Supposing officials were appointed on account of their partisanship, then the people would strive to cultivate friendships and never seek employment in accordance with the law. Thus, if the government lack able men, the state will fall into confusion. If rewards are bestowed according to mere reputation, and punishments are inflicted according to mere defamation, then men who love rewards and hate punishments will discard the law of the public and practice self-seeking tricks and associate for wicked purposes. If ministers forget the interest of the sovereign, make friends with outside people, and thereby promote their adherents, then their inferiors will be in low spirits to serve the sovereign. Their friends are many, their adherents numerous. When they form juntas in and out, then though they have great faults, their ways of disguise will be innumerable. For such reasons, loyal ministers, innocent as they are always facing danger and the death penalty, whereas wicked ministers, though of no merit, always enjoy security and prosperity. Should loyal ministers meet danger and death without committing any crime, good ministers would withdraw. Should wicked ministers enjoy security and prosperity without rendering any meritorious service, villainous ministers would advance. This is the beginning of decay. Were such the case, all officials would discard legalism, practicing favoritism and despising public law. They would frequent the gates of the residences of cunning men, but never once would they visit the court of the sovereign. For 100 times they would ponder the interests of private families, but never once would they scheme for the state welfare of the sovereign. Thus, their subordinates, however numerous, are not for glorifying the ruler. The officials, however well selected, are not for serving the country. If so, the sovereign would have the mere name of the Lord of men, but in reality he simply commits himself to the care of the houses of the various ministers. Hence your servant says, the court of a decaying state has no man. That the court has no man does not imply the emptiness of the court. It means that private families strive to benefit one another, but never seek to enhance the state welfare. That high officials strive to honor one another, but never seek to honor the ruler, and that petty officials spend their salaries in cultivating personal friendships, but never attend to their official duties. The reason, therefore, is, the sovereign never makes his decisions in accordance with the law, but always trusts in his subordinates for whatever they do. Therefore, the intelligent sovereign makes the law select men and makes no arbitrary promotion himself. He makes the law measure merits and makes no arbitrary regulation himself. In consequence, able men cannot be obscured, bad characters cannot be disguised, falsely praised fellows cannot be advanced, wrongly defamed people cannot be degraded. Accordingly, between ruler and minister distinction becomes clear and order is attained. Thus it suffices only if the sovereign can scrutinize laws. The wise man, on ministering to a ruler, faces the north and swears an oath of his office, pledging not to have two minds, never to reject any low commission in the court, and never to reject any hard job in the military camp, but to follow the instructions of his superior, to obey the law of the sovereign and empty his mind so as to wait for the royal decrees to come and to have no dispute about them. Therefore, though he has a mouth of his own, he never speaks for his own advantage. Though he has eyes of his own, he never sees for his private interest. Both his mouth and eyes are kept under his superior's control. In other words, who ministers to a ruler may be likened to the hand that is able to care for the head upward and for the feet downward, never fails to relieve them from extremes of cold and heat, and never fails to strike away even the Moya sword when it is near the body. Similarly, the intelligent ruler never employs worthy and clever ministers or wise and able men for any selfish purpose. Therefore, the people do not cross the village border to make friends and have no relatives living 100 li away. High and low do not trespass against each other. The fool and the wise, each being content with his own lot, keep the scale and stand in perfect balance. Such is the crowning phase of order, indeed. Now, those who make light of rank and bounties, resign from their offices and desert their posts with ease, and thereby choose their masters, your servant does not call upright. Those who falsify theories, disobey laws, defy the sovereign, and make forcible remonstrances, your servant does not call loyal. Those who bestow favors, distribute profits, win the hearts of inferiors, and thereby make names, your servant does not call benevolent. Those who leave the world, retire from active life, and thereby reprove the sovereign, your servant does not call righteous. Those who serve abroad as envoys to other feudal lords, exhaust the strength of the native country, and wait for the moment of crisis to molest the sovereign, saying, "The interstate friendship, unless your servant be in charge of it, cannot become intimate. The interstate enmity, unless your servant be in charge of it, cannot be appeased," and thereby aim to win the sovereign's confidence, to be trusted with state affairs, and to increase their influence by lowering the name of the sovereign and benefit their own families by hampering the resources of the country, your servant does not call wise. These examples are common practices prevailing in the dangerous age, which the law of the early kings would weed out. The law of the early kings said, "Every minister shall not exercise his authority, nor shall he scheme for his own advantage, but shall follow his majesty's instructions. He shall not do evil, but shall follow his majesty's path." Thus, in antiquity, the people of an orderly age abode by the public law, discarded all self-seeking tricks, devoted their attention, and united their actions to wait for employment by their superiors. Indeed, the Lord of Men, if he has to inspect all officials himself, finds the day not long enough and his energy not great enough. Moreover, if the superior uses his eyes, the inferior ornaments his looks. If the superior uses his ears, the inferior ornaments his voice. And if the superior uses his mind, the inferior twists his sentences. Regarding these three faculties as insufficient, the early kings left aside their own talents and relied on laws and numbers, and acted carefully on the principles of reward and punishment. Thus, what the early kings did was to the purpose of political order. Their laws, however simplified, were not violated. Despite the autocratic rule within the four seas, the cunning could not apply their fabrications. The deceitful could not practice their plausibilities, and the wicked found no means to resort to, so that, though as far away from his majesty as beyond 1,000 lie, they dared not change their words, and though as near by his majesty as the courtiers, they dared not cover the good and disguise the wrong. The officials in the court, high and low, never trespassed against each other, nor did they ever override their posts. Accordingly, the sovereign's administrative routine did not take up all his time, while each day afforded enough leisure. Such was due to the way the ruler trusted to his position. Indeed, the minister trespasses against the sovereign in the court as in the lie of the land. Leading forward step by step, he makes the Lord of men forget the starting point until he turns from east to west and is not conscious of the change. To guard against such misleadings, the early kings set up the south-pointing needle to ascertain the directions of sunrise and sunset. Thus, every intelligent ruler ordered his ministers never to realize their wishes outside the realm of law, and never to bestow their favors inside the realm of law. In short, never to commit any unlawful act. As strict laws are means to forbid extrajudicial action and exterminate selfishness, and severe penalties are means to execute decrees and censure inferiors, legal authority should not be deputed to anybody, and legal control should not be held behind the same gate. Should legal authority and control be kept in common by both ruler and minister, all varieties of wickedness would come into existence. If law is of no faith, its enforcement by the ruler is absurd. If penalty is not definite, culprits cannot be overcome. Hence the saying, the skillful carpenter, though able to mark the inked string with his surveying eyes and calculating mind, always takes compasses and squares as measures before his marking. The great genius, though able to accomplish his task with swift move, always takes the law of the early kings as the ruler before his accomplishment. Thus, if the inked string is straight, crooked timbers will be shaved. If the water level is even, high gnarls will be planed down. Similarly, if weights and balances are well hung up, what is too heavy will be decreased, and what is too light will be increased. Once pecks and bushels are established, what is too much will be decreased, and what is too little will be increased. Hence, to govern the state by law is to praise the right and blame the wrong. The law does not fawn on the noble, the string does not yield to the crooked. Whatever the law applies to, the wise cannot reject, nor can the brave defy. Punishment for fault never skips ministers, reward for good never misses commoners. Therefore, to correct the faults of the high, to rebuke the vices of the low, to suppress disorders, to decide against mistakes, to subdue the arrogant, to straighten the crooked, and to unify the folkways of the masses, nothing could match the law. To warn the officials and overawe the people, to rebuke obscenity and danger, and to forbid falsehood and deceit, nothing could match penalty. If penalty is severe, the noble cannot discriminate against the humble. If law is definite, the superiors are esteemed and not violated. If the superiors are not violated, the sovereign will become strong and able to maintain the proper course of government. Such was the reason why the early kings esteemed legalism and handed it down to posterity. Should the Lord of men discard law and practice selfishness, high and low would have no distinction. Chapter 7. The Two Handles. The means whereby the intelligent ruler controls his ministers are two handles only. The two handles are chastisement and commendation. What are meant by chastisement and commendation? To inflict death or torture upon culprits is called chastisement. To bestow encouragements or rewards on men of merit is called commendation. Ministers are afraid of censure and punishment, but fond of encouragement and reward. Therefore, if the Lord of men uses the handles of chastisement and commendation, all ministers will dread his severity and turn to his liberality. The villainous ministers of the age are different. To men they hate they would by securing the handle of chastisement from the sovereign ascribe crimes. On men they love they would, by securing the handle of commendation from the sovereign, bestow rewards. Now supposing the Lord of men place the authority of punishment and the profit of reward not in his hands, but let the ministers administer the affairs of reward and punishment instead, then everybody in the country would fear the ministers and slight the ruler, and turn to the ministers and away from the ruler. This is the calamity of the ruler's loss of the handles of chastisement and commendation. As illustration, that which enables the tiger to subject the dog is his claws and fangs. Supposing the tiger cast aside its claws and fangs and let the dog use them, the tiger would in turn be subjected by the dog. The Lord of men controls his ministers by means of chastisement and commendation. Now supposing the ruler of men cast aside the handles of chastisement and commendation and let the ministers use them, the ruler would in turn be controlled by the ministers. Thus, Tianchang petitioned for rank and bounties, which he in his turn conferred upon the body of officials, and enlarged pecks and bushels, by virtue of which he distributed alms among the 100 surnames. In other words, Duke Qian lost the handle of commendation, which Tianchang set to use. In the long run, Duke Qian was murdered. Likewise, Zhu Han once said to the ruler of Sung, "Indeed, rewards and charities being what the people like, may your highness bestow them. Slaughter and punishments being what the people dislike, may your servant beg leave to enforce them." Thenceforth, the ruler of Sung lost the handle of chastisement, which Zhu Han set to use. Hence followed the molestation of the ruler of Sung. Inasmuch as Tianchang used only the handle of commendation, Duke Qian was murdered. Inasmuch as Zhu Han used only the handle of chastisement, the ruler of Sung was molested. Therefore, if any minister of the present age uses both the handles of chastisement and commendation, the danger of his ruler will be more serious than that of Duke Qian and the ruler of Sung. For this reason, every sovereign molested, murdered, deluded, or deceived, because he had lost the handles of chastisement and commendation and let the ministers use them, invited danger and ruin accordingly. The Lord of men, whenever he wants to suppress culprits, must see norm accord with name and word, never differ from task. Whenever a minister utters a word, the ruler should in accordance with his word assign him a task to accomplish, and in accordance with the task call the work to account. If the work corresponds with the task, and the task corresponds with the word, he should be rewarded. On the contrary, if the work is not equivalent to the task, and the task not equivalent to the word, he should be punished. Accordingly, any minister whose word is big, but whose work is small, should be punished. Not that the work is small, but that the work is not equivalent to the name. Again, any minister whose word is small, but whose work is big, should also be punished. Not that big work is not desirable, but that the discrepancy between the work and the name is worse than the accomplishment of the big work. Hence the minister should be punished. Once in bygone days, Marquis Chao of Han was drunk and fell into a nap. The crown keeper, seeing the ruler exposed to cold, put a coat over him. When the Marquis awoke, he was glad and asked the attendants, "Who put more clothes on my body?" "The crown keeper did," they replied. Then the Marquis found the coat keeper guilty and put the crown keeper to death. He punished the coat keeper for the neglect of his duty, and the crown keeper for the overriding of his post. Not that the Marquis was not afraid of catching cold, but that he thought their trespassing the assigned duties was worse than his catching cold. Thus, when an intelligent ruler keeps ministers in service, no minister is allowed either to override his post and get merits thereby, nor to utter any word not equivalent to a fact. Whoever overrides his post is put to death. Whoever makes a word not equivalent to a fact is punished. If everyone has to do his official duty, and if whatever he says has to be earnest, then the ministers cannot associate for treasonable purposes. The Lord of men has two difficulties to face. If he appoints only worthy men to office, ministers will, on the pretense of worthiness, attempt to deceive their ruler. If he makes arbitrary promotions of officials, the state affairs will always be menaced. Similarly, if the Lord of Men loves worthiness, ministers will gloss over their defects in order to meet the ruler's need. In consequence, no minister will show his true heart. If no minister shows his true heart, the Lord of Men will find no way to tell the worthy from the unworthy. For instance, because the king of Yue liked brave men, the people made light of death. Because King Ling of Chu liked slender waists, the country became full of starvelings. Because Duke Huan of Qi was by nature jealous and fond of women, Shu Tiao castrated himself in order to administer the harem. Because Duke Huan liked different tastes, Yi steamed the head of his son and served Duke Huan with the rare taste. Because Tsukuai of Yen liked worthies, Tzu Chi pretended that he would not accept the state. Therefore, if the ruler reveals his hate, ministers will conceal their motives. If the ruler reveals his likes, ministers will pretend to talent. And if the ruler reveals his wants, ministers will have the opportunity to disguise their feelings and attitudes. That was the reason why Tzu Chi, by pretending to worthiness, usurped the ruler's throne, and why Shu Tiao and Yiya, by complying with their ruler's wants, molested their ruler. Thus Tsukuai died in consequence of a civil war, and Duke Huan was left unburied until worms from his corpse crawled outdoors. What was the cause of these incidents? It was nothing but the calamity of the ruler's revelation of true hearts to ministers. Every minister in his heart of hearts does not necessarily love the ruler. If he does, it is for the sake of his own great advantage. In these days, if the Lord of Men neither covers his feelings nor conceals his motives, and if he lets ministers have a chance to molest their master, the ministers will have no difficulty in following the examples of Tzu Chi and Tian Chang. Hence the saying, if the ruler's likes and hate be concealed, the ministers' true hearts will be revealed. If the ministers reveal their true hearts, the ruler never will be deluded. Chapter 8. Wielding the scepter. Heaven has its destiny. Human beings have their destiny too. Indeed, anything smelling good and tasting soft, be it rich wine or fat meat, is delicious to the mouth, but it causes the body illness. The beauty having delicate skin and pretty white teeth pleases feeling but exhausts energy. Hence avoid excesses and extremes. Then you will suffer no harm. The scepter should never be shown, for its inner nature is non-assertion. The state affairs may be scattered in the four directions, but the key to their administration is in the center. The sage holding this key in hand, people from the four directions come to render him meritorious services. He remains empty and waits for their services, and they will exert their abilities by themselves. With the conditions of the four seas clearly in mind, he can see the yang by means of the yin. After appointing attendants on his right and left, he can open the gate and meet anybody. He can go onward with the two handles without making any change. To apply them without cessation is said to be acting on the right way of government. Indeed, everything has its function. Every material has its utility. When everybody works according to his special qualification, both superior and inferior will not have to do anything. Let roosters herald the dawn, and let cats watch for rats. When everything exercises its special qualification, the ruler will not have to do anything. If the ruler has to exert any special skill of his own, it means that affairs are not going right. If he is conceited and fond of displaying his ability, he will be deceived by the inferiors. If he is sagacious and lenient, the inferiors will take advantage of his capacity. If superior and inferior exchange their roles, the state never will be in order. The way to assume oneness starts from the study of terminology. When names are rectified, things will be settled. When names are distorted, things will shift around. Therefore, the sage holds oneness in hand and rests in tranquility, letting names appoint themselves to tasks and affairs settle themselves. If he does not show off his sagacity, the inferiors will reveal their earnestness and uprightness. He then appoints them to office in accordance with their words, and thus lets them choose their tasks. He confers upon them powers in accordance with their needs, and thus lets them raise their ranks. Thus he rectifies their names first, then works with them, and finally makes them accomplish the tasks. Therefore he promotes them through the examination of names. When the name is not clear, he seeks for its connotation by tracing its form. After the form and the name are compared and identified, he puts the product into use. If both form and name have to be true, the inferiors will have to reveal their true hearts too. Carefully attend to your duties, wait for decrees from heaven to come, and never miss the key to government. Then you will become a sage. The way of the sage is to discard his own wisdom and talent. If his own wisdom and talent are not discarded, it will be hard for him to keep a constant principle of government. When the people exert wisdom and talent, they will suffer disasters. When the sovereign exerts them, the state will be in danger and on the decline. So, conform to the way of heaven, act on the principle of human life, and then consider, compare, and investigate them. Where there is an ending, there is always a beginning. Be empty and reposed, keep behind others, and never assert yourself before anybody else. For the calamity of the ruler originates in self-assertion. Nevertheless, though you have faith in the inferior's words, you must not listen to them blindly. Then the myriad people will uniformly obey you. Indeed, Tao is so magnificent as to have no form. Te is evidently systematic and so extensive as to permeate all lives. When it functions proportionately, the myriad things are formed, though it does not add to their security. Thus Tao is omnipresent in all events. So, follow and preserve its decrees and live and die at the right time. Compare the names of different things and trace the common source of the principles underlying them. Hence the saying, Tao does not identify itself with anything but itself. Te does not identify itself with the yin and the yang. The balance does not identify itself with lightness and heaviness. The inked string does not identify itself with ingress and egress. The reed organ does not identify itself with dryness and wetness. The ruler does not identify himself with the ministers. These 6 are effects of Tao. Tao is never a pair. Hence it is called one. Therefore, the intelligent ruler esteems singleness, the characteristic feature of Tao. Accordingly, ruler and minister do not follow the same path. When the minister presents any word to the throne, the ruler holds to the name and the minister must work out the form. When form and name are compared and found identical, superior and inferior will have peace and harmony. In general, the right way to listen to the ministers is to take what they utter as the measure of what they harvest. The ruler investigates their names so as to determine their offices and clarify their duties so as to distinguish between different varieties of work. The right way to hear different utterances is to look drunken. Never start moving your own lips and teeth before the subordinates do. The longer I keep quiet, the sooner others move their lips and teeth. As they themselves move their lips and teeth, I can thereby understand their real intentions. Right and wrong words coming to the fore in such fashion, the ruler does not have to join issue with them. To remain empty and tranquil and practice inaction is the real status of Tao. To compare, refer, and analogize things is the form of affairs. Thus you sometime compare them and analogize them to other things, and sometime refer them to and accord them with the condition of emptiness. When the root and trunk of a tree never change, motion and rest will cause no loss of its original status. Make the inferiors feel uneasy. Improve their actions by practicing inaction. When you like them, affairs will multiply. When you hate them, resentment will appear. So, discard both like and hate, and make your empty mind the abode of Tao. If the ruler does not share the supreme authority with the ministers, the people will regard this as a great blessing. The ruler should never discuss matters of right and wrong with the ministers, but let them carry on the discussion themselves. If he locks the inner bar and sees the courtyard from inside the room, then just as differences by inches and feet would come to the fore, so will all ministers know their proper places. Who deserves reward will be properly rewarded. Who deserves punishment will be properly punished. If everybody pays for whatever he does, and if good and evil visit him without fail, who would dare to distrust the law? Once compasses and squares are established, and one angle is made right, the other 3 angles will come out one after another. If the sovereign is not mysterious, the ministers will find opportunity to take. For, if his task is improper, they will change their routine of work. To behave as high as heaven and as thick as earth is the way to dissolve all worries. To do as heaven and earth do is the way to dismiss all discriminations between strangers and relatives. Whoever can model himself upon heaven and earth is called a sage. To govern the interior of the court, you may appoint men to office, but should never take kindly to them. To govern the exterior of the court, you may put one man in charge of one office, but should never allow him to act arbitrarily. If things are so, how can anybody shake the ruler's authority or gain any undue power? If there are numerous men frequenting the gates of the high officials' residences, it will cause the ruler anxieties. At the height of political order, no minister can surmise what is in the ruler's mind. If the ruler closely accords form with name, the people will attend to their daily business. To leave this key and seek anything else is to fall into serious bewilderment. This will eventually increase the number of cunning people and fill the rulers right and left with wicked ministers. Hence the saying, "Never ennoble anybody in such wise that he may molest you, and never trust anybody so exclusively that you lose the capital and the state to him." If the calf is larger than the thigh, it is hard to run fast. As soon as the sovereign ceases being mysterious, the tiger will follow him from behind. If he takes no notice of it, the tiger will behave like a dog. At this moment, if the sovereign does not stop it, the false dog will increase its partisans. The tigers will form a party and murder the mother. If the sovereign has no ministers loyal to him, what kind of a state has he? Yet as soon as the sovereign begins to enforce laws, even tigers will become meek. As soon as he sets himself to inflict penalties, even the largest tiger will become tame. Laws and penalties being of faith, tigers will turn into ordinary human beings and revert to their due status. Any ruler wishing to give peace to the state must disperse the partisans of powerful ministers. If he does not disperse their partisans, they will enlarge their parties. Any ruler wishing to maintain order in his country must adjust the distribution of his gifts. If he does not adjust the distribution of his gifts, rapacious men will seek for extraordinary profits. To grant them requests will then be the same as to lend axes to enemies. It is not right to lend out such things, for they will be used for assaulting the ruler. The Yellow Emperor made the saying, "Superior and inferior wage 100 battles a day." The inferior conceals his tricks which he uses in testing the superior. The superior manipulates rules and measures in splitting the influences of the inferior. Therefore, the institution of rules and measures is the sovereign's treasure. The possession of partisans and adherents is the minister's treasure. Such being the situation, if the minister does not murder the ruler, it is because his partisans and adherents are not yet sufficient. Therefore, if the superior loses 1 or 2 inches, the inferior will gain 8 or 16 feet. The ruler in possession of a state never enlarges the capital. The minister following the true path never empowers his own family. The ruler following the right way never empowers any minister. Because once empowered and enriched, the inferior will attempt to supplant the superior. So, guard against dangers and be afraid of eventualities. Install the crown prince quickly. then many troubles find no way to appear. To detect culprits inside the court and guard against crooks outside it, the ruler must personally hold his rules and measures. Make the powerful wane and the powerless wax. Both waning and waxing should have limitations. Never allow the people to form juntas and thereby deceive their superiors with one accord. Make the powerful wane like the moon, and the powerless wax like the heat of the board fire. Simplify orders and dignify censures. Make the application of penal laws definite. Never loosen your bow, otherwise you will find 2 males in one nest. Where there are 2 males in one nest, there the fighting will continue at 6s and 7s. When wolves are in the stable, sheep never will flourish. When 2 masters are in one house, nothing can be accomplished. When both man and wife manage the household, children will not know whom to obey. The ruler of men should often stretch the tree, but never allow its branches to flourish. Luxuriant branches will cover the gates of public buildings, till private houses become full, public halls empty, and the sovereign deluded. So stretch out the tree often, but never allow any branch to grow outward. Any branch that grows outward will molest the position of the sovereign. Again, stretch out the tree often, but never allow any branch to grow larger than the stem. When the branches are large and the stem is small, the tree will be unable to endure spring winds. When the tree cannot endure spring winds, the branches will damage its kernel. Similarly, when illegitimate sons are many, the heir apparent will have worries and anxieties. The only way to check them is to stretch out the tree often and never let its branches flourish. If the tree is stretched out often, partisans and adherents of the wicked ministers will disperse. When the roots and the stem are dug up, the tree is no longer alive. Fill up the foaming fountain with mud and never let the water clear. Search the bosoms of ministers and take away their powers. The sovereign should exercise such powers himself with the speed of the lightning and with the dignity of the thunder. Chapter 9. 8 Villainies. In general, there are 8 ways whereby ministers are led to commit villainy. The first is said to be through the bribery of sharers of the same bed. What is meant by through the bribery of sharers of the same bed? In reply I say, by graceful ladies, beloved concubines, feminine courtiers, and pretty lads, the Lord of men is bewildered. Counting on the sovereign's pleasant rest from governmental work and taking advantage of his being drunken and satiated, the sharers of the same bed would get from him what they want. This is the way to secure unfailing grants. Therefore, ministers bribe them in secret with gold and jewelry, and thereby make them bewilder the sovereign. This is said to be through the bribery of sharers of the same bed. The second is said to be through the bribery of bystanders. What is meant by through the bribery of bystanders? In reply I say, actors, jokers, and clowns, as well as attendants and courtiers, would say, at your service, before the sovereign has given any order, and say, yes, yes, before he has commanded them to do anything, thus taking orders ahead of his words, and looking at his facial expressions, and judging his needs by his color, in order thereby to render him service before he makes up his mind. Such people advance and withdraw en bloc, respond and reply with one accord, thus identifying their deeds and unifying their words so as to move the sovereign's mind. Therefore, ministers bribe them in secret with gold, jewelry, curios, and the like, and commit unlawful acts to their advantage, and thereby make them beguile the sovereign. This is said to be through the bribery of bystanders. The third is said to be through the entertainment of uncles and brothers. What is meant by through the entertainment of uncles and brothers? In reply I say, sons by concubines are much loved by the sovereign. Prime ministers and court officials are consulted by the sovereign. All such people exert their energies and exchange their ideas while the sovereign always listens to them. Ministers, accordingly, entertain concubines and their sons with music and beauties, and win the hearts of prime ministers and court officials with twisted words and sentences. Then through them they make promises and submit projects to the throne, so that when the tasks are accomplished, their ranks are raised, their bounties increased, and their minds thereby satisfied. In this way they make them violate the sovereign. This is said to be through the entertainment of uncles and brothers. The fourth is said to be through fostering calamities. What is meant by through fostering calamities? In reply, I say, the sovereign enjoys beautifying his palatial buildings, terraces, and pools, and decorating boys, girls, dogs, and horses, so as to amuse his mind. This will eventually bring him calamities. Therefore, ministers exhaust the energy of the people to beautify palatial buildings, terraces, and pools, and increase exactions and taxation for decorating boys, girls, dogs, and horses, and thereby amuse the sovereign and disturb his mind, thus following his wants and harvesting their own advantages thereby. This is said to be through fostering calamities. The fifth is said to be through buying up vagabonds. What is meant by through buying up vagabonds? In reply, I say, ministers distribute money out of public revenues to please the masses of people and bestow small favors to win the hearts of the 100 surnames, and thereby make everybody, whether in the court or in the marketplace, praise them, and by deluding the sovereign in this manner, get what they want. This is said to be through buying up vagabonds. The sixth is said to be through the employment of fluent and convincing speakers. What is meant by through the employment of fluent and convincing speakers? In reply, I say, the sovereign, with all avenues to news blockaded, rarely hears any disputes and discussions, and is therefore apt to change his mind by eloquent persuaders. Accordingly, ministers find eloquent speakers from among the subjects of other feudal lords, and feed able persuaders in the country, then make them speak about their self-seeking designs with skillfully polished words and fluent and convincing phrases, show the sovereign the direction of advantages and powers, overawe him with the location of calamities and disadvantages, manipulate all kinds of false sayings, and thereby deprave him. This is said to be through the employment of fluent and convincing speakers. The seventh is said to be through the arrogation of authority and strength. What is meant by through the arrogation of authority and strength? In reply, I say, the ruler of men maintains his authority and strength by keeping all officials and the 100 surnames on his side. Whatever he considers good is regarded as good by the officials and the people. Whatever he never considers good is not regarded as good by the officials and the people. Ministers then gather bold swordsmen and desperate rascals to display their authority and make it known that whoever sides with them always gains, and whoever does not side with them is bound to die, and thereby overawe the officials and the people and practice selfishness. This is said to be through the arrogation of authority and strength. The eighth is said to be through the accumulation of support from the 4 directions. What is meant by through the accumulation of support from the 4 directions? In reply, I say, the ruler of men, if his country is small, has to serve big powers, and if his army is weak, has to fear strong armies. Any request by a big power the small country always has to accept. Any demand by a strong army, the weak army always has to obey. Accordingly, ministers raise exactions and taxations, exhaust public treasuries and armories, empty the provisions of the country, and thereby serve big powers and utilize their influence to mislead the ruler. In serious cases, they would even send for foreign troops to assemble in the borderlands while they restrain their sovereign inside the country. Otherwise, they would invite special envoys from enemy states to molest their ruler and thereby overawe him. This is said to be through the accumulation of support from the 4 directions. These 8 in general are the ways whereby ministers are led to commit villainy, and the sovereigns of the present age are deluded, molested, and deprived of their possessions. Therefore, every sovereign should not fail to study them carefully. The intelligent ruler, as regards women, may enjoy their beauty, but ought not to follow their entreaties and comply with their requests. As regards those near him, though he enjoys their presence, he must always call their words to account and never let them utter any uncalled-for opinion. As regards uncles, brothers, and chief vassals, the ruler, on adopting their words, ought to hold them liable to penalties in case of failure and appoint them to office in case of success, but never give them any arbitrary promotion. On seeking pleasures and enjoying curious, the ruler ought to have a definite personnel in charge of them, and allow nobody to bring such objects in and out at pleasure, and thereby let the ministers anticipate the sovereign's want. In regard to favor distribution, it ought to be done on the initiative of the ruler to open the emergency treasury and public storehouses and benefit the people. No minister should be allowed to bestow personal favors. Regarding persuasions and discussions, the ruler must ascertain the abilities of men reputed to be good and testify to the defects of those reputed to be bad, but never allow the ministers to speak to one another about them. As regards bold and strong men, the ruler should neither neglect reward for merit on the battlefield, nor remit punishment for boldness in the village quarrel, and allow no minister to give them money in private. With respect to the requests made by other feudal lords, if they are lawful, grant them. If they are unlawful, spurn them. The so-called doomed ruler is not one who no longer has a state, but one who has a state, but not in his grip. If he lets his ministers control the home affairs through the support they receive from abroad, the ruler of men will be doomed to ruin. Granting that to obey big powers is to save one's own country from ruin, the ruin will in case of obedience come faster than in the case of disobedience. Hence, never obey them. As soon as the ministers realize that the ruler will not obey, they will not make friends abroad with other feudal lords. As soon as the feudal lords realize that he will not obey, they will not trust that any of his ministers can befool him. The reason why the intelligent ruler establishes posts, offices, ranks, and bounties is to promote the worthy and encourage the men of merit. Hence the saying, "The worthy get large bounties and take charge of high offices. The men of merit have honorable rank and receive big rewards." The sovereign appoints the worthy to office by estimating their abilities and bestows bounties according to the various merits. For this reason, worthies do not disguise their abilities in serving the sovereign, and men of merit rejoice in advancing their careers. As a result, tasks are accomplished and merits achieved. That is not so nowadays. There is neither any discrimination between the worthy and the unworthy, nor any distinction between men of merit and of no merit. Anybody esteemed by the feudal lords is taken into service. Any request made by the courtiers is granted. Uncles and brothers, as well as chief vassals, ask for ranks and bounties from the sovereign, and sell them off to their inferiors, and thereby accumulate money and advantages and support their personal dependents. Therefore, men who have much money and many advantages purchase offices in order to become noble, and those who have friendships with the courtiers ask for grants in order to uplift their social prestige. In consequence, officials and officers who have rendered the country meritorious services are lost sight of, and the shift of posts and offices runs off the legitimate track. For this reason, everybody in governmental service overrides his post, cultivates friendship with foreign powers, neglects his duties, and covets money in every way, with the result that worthies are disheartened and will no longer exert their efforts while men of merit idle their time away and give up their careers. Such is the atmosphere of a decaying country indeed. Chapter 10. 10 Faults of the 10 Faults. The first is to practice loyalty in small ways, which betrays loyalty in big ways. The second is to esteem small advantages, which hampers big advantages. The third is to force personal bias, assert oneself, and behave discourteously before feudal lords, which leads to self-destruction. The fourth is to neglect political counsels and indulge in the 5 musical notes, which plunges one into misery. The fifth is to keep covetous and self-opinionated and rejoice in nothing but gain, which is the root of state ruin and self-destruction. The sixth is to indulge in women singers and neglect state affairs, which forecasts the catastrophe of state ruin. The seventh is to leave home for distant travels and ignore remonstrances, which is the surest way to endanger one's august position at home. The eighth is to commit faults, turn no ear to loyal ministers, and enforce one's own opinions, which destroys one's high reputation and causes people to laugh at one. The ninth is not to consolidate the forces within one's boundaries, but to rely on feudal lords abroad, which causes the country the calamity of dismemberment. The 10th is to insult big powers despite the smallness of one's own country, and take no advice from remonstrance, which paves the way to the extermination of one's posterity. What is meant by practicing small loyalty? Once King Kung of Chu and Duke Li of Qin fought at Yenling. The Chu troops suffered a defeat. King Kung was wounded in the eye. During the bloody battle, Su Fan, High Commissioner of the Army, was thirsty and wanted something to drink. His attendant Shu Yanko brought a cup of wine and presented it to him. "Fee, get away!" exclaimed Su Fan. "It's wine." "No, it isn't wine," replied Yanko. Su Fan accordingly took the cup and drank the wine. Habitually fond of wine, he found it so delicious that he could not keep it from his mouth till he became drunk. When the fighting was over, King Kung wanted to have another battle and sent for the High Commissioner of the Army, Su Fan. The High Commissioner of the Army, Su Fan, gave a pain in the heart as excuse for his absence from the conference. Thereupon King Kung rode in a carriage and went to make a personal call. As soon as he entered the tent of the commissioner, he smelt wine and turned back right away, saying, "In today's battle, I, the king, was wounded. The only person I have looked to for help is the High Commissioner of the Army. Now that the High Commissioner of the Army is drunken in this manner, he is certainly ruining the altar of the spirits of land and grain of the Chu state, and feeling no concern for the welfare of my subjects. I, the king, have no reason to have him with me on the battlefield any longer." So he turned his forces homeward and retreated. He then beheaded Su Fan as an expiatory punishment for his disgrace of the king. Thus, the presentation of wine by Shu Yanko was not meant to revenge himself on Su Fan, but his mind that loved him with loyalty was just enough to put him to death. Hence the saying, "To practice loyalty in small ways betrays loyalty in big ways." What is meant by esteeming small advantages? Of old, when Duke Xian of Qin thought of borrowing the way through Yu to invade Kuo, Xin Shi said, "If we bribe the Duke of Yu with the jade from Chui Chi and the team of the Chu breed, he will certainly let us have the way." "The jade from Chui Chi," said the Duke, "was the treasure bequeathed by the late ruler. The team of the Chu breed horses is my best possession. Should they accept our present but refuse us the way, what could we do then?" "If they refuse us the way," said Shun Shi in reply, "they never will accept our present. If they accept our present and lend us the way, it will be the same as to take the treasure from the inner treasury and keep it in the outer one, or to lead the horses out of the inner stable and put them into the outer one. May your highness have no worry about it." "Very well," the Duke said, and he then sent Shun Shi off to bribe the Duke of Yu with the jade from Chui Chi and the team of the Chu breed, and thereby ask for the way through the country. The Duke of Yu, regarding the jade and the horses as inordinate advantages, thought of granting the request. Against this idea Kung Chi Chi remonstrated with him, saying, Your Highness should not grant the request. Indeed, Yu has Kuo as neighbor, just as the carriage has its wheels. Just as the wheels depend on the carriage, so does the carriage depend on the wheels. Such is the relationship between you and Kuo. Suppose we lend Qin the way. Then, if Kuo falls at dawn, you will follow at dusk. It is therefore impossible. May your Highness never grant the request. The Duke of Yu would not listen to this advice, and he let Qin have the way. 3 years elapsed after his attack on Kuo, his conquest of the country, and victorious return to his homeland, when Shun Shi in turn raised armies to invade Yu and also conquered it. When Shun Shi led the horses homeward, brought the jade along, and reported the result of the campaign to Duke Xian. With delight Duke Xian said, "The jade is as it was before, but the teeth of the horses have grown somewhat longer." Thus the Duke of Yu saw his army driven into peril and his country dismembered. Why? It was because of his love of small advantages and unconcern about its harmfulness. Hence the saying, "To esteem small advantages hampers large advantages." What is meant by enforcing personal bias? In bygone days, when King Ling of Chu called an interstate conference at Shen, as the Crown Prince of Sung arrived late, he arrested him and put him into jail. Further, he insulted the ruler of Shu and detained Qing Feng of Qi. Against these outrageous acts, a certain middle chamberlain remonstrated with the king, saying, "In holding a conference of the feudal lords, nobody should break the interstate etiquette, for it involves a death or life turning point to every country. In antiquity, after Chie held the conference at Yuzheng, Yumin revolted. After Chao gave a spring hunting party on the Li Hills, the eastern barbarians revolted. And after King Yu organized the Taishi League, the western and northern barbarians revolted. All such incidents were due to the breach of etiquette. May your Majesty think the matter over." To this counsel the ruler never listened, but enforced his own opinions instead. Before 10 years elapsed, King Ling made a tour to the south, where the officials molested him. As a result, King Ling starved to death by the dry brook. Hence the saying, "To enforce personal bias and assert oneself leads to self-destruction." What is meant by indulging in the 5 musical notes? In bygone days, when Duke Ling of Wei on his way to Qin arrived by the Pu water, he loosened his carriage, released the horses, and set up a pavilion for sojourning. Towards midnight, he heard somebody playing a novel piece of music, and was thereby greatly pleased. In the morning he sent men out to find the musician in the vicinity, but all came back with the report that he could not be found. Thereupon the Duke summoned musician Chuan and said to him, "There was somebody playing strange music last night. I have just sent men out to find the musician in the vicinity, but all reported that they had been unable to find him. It might be the performance by some devil or spirit. Would you, therefore, listen to it and copy it for me?" "At your service," replied musician Chuan. So he sat still at night and played the harp to copy the music. Next day, musician Chuan gave his report to the Duke, saying, "Your servant got it, but he is still lacking in practice. Let us stay here another night, and your servant will practice it." "Certainly," said Duke Ling. So they spent another night there. By the following day he had mastered it, wherefore they left for Qin. Duke Ping of Qin entertained them with a wine feast on the Shi Tower. When the drinking was at its height, Duke Ling stood up and said, "There is a novel piece of music. May I have the honor to show it?" "Fine," replied Duke Ping. Thereupon Duke Ling summoned musician Chuan and ordered him to sit beside musician Kuang, hold the harp and play it. Before the performance was finished, musician Kuang held down his hands and stopped the music, saying, "This is a state-ruining piece of music, which should not be performed to its end." "Where does this music come from? Do you know?" asked Duke Ping. "This was composed by musician Yen," replied musician Kuang, "and presented to King Chao. It was a piece of frivolous music. When King Wu attacked Chao, Musician Yen ran eastward as far as the Pu water, where he drowned himself. Therefore, this music has been heard only by the Pu water. At any rate, whoever hears this music performed is bound to see his native soil dismembered. Its performance, therefore, should not be completed. What amuses me in particular is music, remarked Duke Ping. Let him finish the performance. Musician Chuan, accordingly, performed the piece to its end. What is the name of this tune? Duke Ping asked Musician Kuang. It is the so-called pure sibilant tune, replied Musician Kuang. Is the pure sibilant tune the saddest among all? Asked the Duke further. No, replied Musician Kuang. It is not as sad as the pure lingual tune. Is it possible to hear the pure lingual tune? Asked the Duke still further. No, replied Musician Kuang. In antiquity, those who heard the pure lingual tune were all rulers of virtue and justice. Now, as your Highness's virtue is still shallow, your Highness as yet does not deserve to hear it. Music amusing me in particular, let me hear it? Asked the Duke insistently. Thereby Musician Kuang was forced to hold up the harp and play it. Following the performance of the first part, there came from the south black cranes, 2 times 8, and assembled at the end of the ridge of the gallery roof. After the performance of the second part, they lined up themselves in a row. When the third part was performed, they raised their necks to sing and stretched their wings to dance. Among the notes, the pitches of Kung and Shang echoed in heaven. Thereby Duke Ping was much pleased, and the audience were all amused. Meanwhile, Duke Ping held a cup of wine and rose to drink with the expression of his wish for the health and happiness of Musician Kuang. When he took his seat again, he asked, Is there no tune sadder than the pure lingual tune? It is not as sad as the pure dental tune, replied Musician Kuang. Is it then possible to hear the pure dental tune? Asked Duke Ping. No, replied Musician Kuang. In bygone days, the Yellow Emperor once called a meeting of devils and spirits at the top of the western Tai Mountain. He rode in a divine carriage pulled by dragons, with Pifang keeping pace with the linchpin, Chiyu marching in the front, Earl Wind sweeping the dirt, Master Rain sprinkling water on the road, tigers and wolves leading in the front, devils and spirits following from behind, rising serpents rolling on the ground, and male and female phoenixes flying over the top. There in such a splendid manner he met the devils and spirits, where he composed the pure dental tune. Now, as your Highness's virtue is still shallow, your Highness does not as yet deserve to hear it. If your Highness does hear it, your servant is afraid lest there should be a mishap. Being weighed down with years and amused by music in particular, said Duke Ping, let me hear the tune performed. Thereby Musician Kuang was forced to play it. Following the performance of the first part, there arose dark clouds from the northwestern direction. After the performance of the second part, there came a hurricane, and then a downpour followed, tearing the tents and curtains, breaking the bowls and cups, and sweeping down the tiles of the gallery. The audience all dispersed, while Duke Ping, much terrified, had to hide himself in a gallery room. Thenceforth the Qin state continually had dry weather and suffered a barren land for 3 years, until finally Duke Ping himself caught a mortal disease. Hence the saying, to neglect political counsels and enjoy the 5 musical notes drives one to misery. What is meant by keeping covetous and self-opinionated? Of old, Earl Qi Yao led his allies, Chao, Han, and Wei, to attack Fan and Chunghang and destroyed them. After his victorious return, he rested his soldiers for several years. Then he sent men to demand land from Han. When Viscount Kang of Han decided not to give it, Tuan Kui opposed him, saying, "We must not fail to comply with the demand. Earl Qi, indeed, is by nature fond of gain, self-conceited and opinionated. Now that he has sent his men to demand land from us, if we do not give it, he will certainly turn his troops against Han. Suppose your Highness comply with the demand, for if we give, he will become over-familiar with this practice and will also demand land from other countries, any of which might fail to obey him. In case any other country fails to obey, Earl Chi will certainly impose military pressure upon her. Then Han will evade the crisis and wait for the change of the whole situation. Right, said Viscount Kang, and then ordered messengers to cede a county of 10,000 families to Earl Chi. Thereby Earl Chi was pleased. Likewise, he sent men to demand land from Wei. When Viscount Xuan of Wei decided not to give it, Chao Chia protested against the idea, saying, when he demanded land from Han, Han complied with the demand. Now he is demanding land from Wei. If Wei does not give it, it will mean that Wei counts on its own strength and purposely antagonizes Earl Chi. In case we do not give it, he will certainly move his soldiers against Wei. We had better give it. Right, said Viscount Xuan, and then ordered messengers to cede a county of 10,000 families to Earl Chi. Earl Chi finally sent men to Chao to demand the districts of Chai and Kowloon. As Viscount Xiang of Chao refused to give them, Earl Chi formed a secret alliance with Han and Wei on purpose to invade Chao. Thereupon Viscount Xiang summoned Chang Mengtan and said to him, indeed, Earl Chi is by nature kind to people in appearance, but is in reality unkind to everybody. For 3 times he has sent goodwill envoys to Han and Wei, but I have not received any word from him. No doubt he will move his troops against me. Where can I live in security then? Well, Tung An Yu, an able minister of Viscount Chien, governed Qinyang very well, replied Chang Mengtan, and Yin To followed his steps so closely that the surviving influences of his teachings are still effective in the locality. Suppose your Highness were to decide to live nowhere but in Qingyang. Right, said the Viscount. Then he summoned Yenling Yu and ordered him to lead the infantry, chariots, and cavalry to Qinyang first, while he followed after. Upon his arrival, he set himself to inspect the city walls and the provisions stored by the 5 offices, and found the walls not in good repair, no grain hoarded in the storehouses, no money saved in the treasury, no armor and weapons in the armory, and the whole city unprepared for defense measures. Feeling rather uneasy, Viscount Xiang summoned Chang Mengtan and said to him, I have inspected the city walls as well as the provisions stored by the 5 offices and found nothing well prepared and equipped. How can I cope with the enemy? Your servant has heard, said Chang Mengtan. The sage during his governorship preserved resources among the people and not in the treasury nor in the armory. He endeavored to improve his teachings, but did not repair the city walls. Suppose your Highness issue an emergency decree, requesting the people to keep enough food for 3 years and put any surplus amount of grain into the public storehouses, to keep enough expenses for 3 years and put any surplus amount of money into the state treasury, and to send all leisured men out of their families to repair the city walls. In the evening the Viscount issued the decree. On the following day, the storehouses became unable to hold any more grain, the treasury unable to hold any more money, and the armory unable to take in any more armor and weapons. In the course of 5 days the city walls were well repaired, and all provisions for defense measures were ready. Then the Viscount summoned Chang Mengtan and asked, Though our city walls are now in good repair, provisions for defense measures are now ready. Money and grain are now sufficient, and armor and weapons are now more than enough, yet what can I do without arrows? In reply, Chang Mengtan said, As your servant has heard, when Tung Tzu was governing Qinyang, the fences of the public hall all had on their outer enclosures bush clovers and thorny reeds, whose height nowadays reaches 10 feet. Suppose your Highness take them out and use them. There will then be more than enough arrows. Meanwhile, the Viscount had the reeds and the bushes taken out, had them tried, and found their stiffness not even surpassed by the strength of the stems of fragrant bamboos. Soon afterwards the Viscount asked, I have enough arrows, but what can I do without metal? In reply, Changmengtan said, Your servant has heard that when Tung Tzu was governing Qinyang, the drawing rooms of the public hall and the public dormitory all had columns and pedestals made of refined copper. Suppose your highness were to get them out and use them. So the Viscount had them taken out and got more than enough metal. No sooner than the commands and orders were established and provisions for defense measures were completed, the armies of the 3 enemy countries actually arrived. Immediately after their arrival, they fell on the city walls of Qinyang and started fighting. Yet, despite 3 months' engagement, they could not take the city, wherefore they spread out their troops and besieged it, and led the water of the river outside Qinyang to inundate it. For 3 years they besieged the city of Qinyang. In the meantime, the people inside had to make nests for living and hang up their pans for cooking. When money and foodstuffs were near exhaustion and officers and officials were worn out, Viscount Xiang said to Changmengtan, The provisions are scanty, the resources used up, and officers and officials worn out. I am afraid we shall not be able to hold out. If I want to surrender the city, to which country shall I surrender? In reply, Changmengtan said, Your servant has heard. If a wise man cannot rescue a doomed city from ruin and protect an endangered object against dangers, there is then no use esteeming wisdom. Suppose your highness were to leave aside such an idea and let your servant worm through the water and steal out to see the rulers of Han and Wei. When Changmengtan saw the rulers of Han and Wei, he said, Your servant has heard. When the lips are gone, the teeth are cold. Now that Earl Qi has led your highnesses to invade Chao, Chao is on the verge of destruction. After the fall of Chao, you both will fall next. We know that is very likely to happen, said the 2 rulers, but as Earl Qi is by nature suspicious of everybody and rarely kind to anybody, once he discloses our scheme, his devastation will befall us at once. What can we do then? The scheme coming out from the mouths of both of your highnesses, said Changmengtan, slips only into your servant's ears. Nobody else will ever know it. Accordingly, the 2 rulers promised Changmengtan the revolt of the 2 armies against Earl Qi and fixed a date. That night they sent Changmengtan off into Qinyang to report their plot to Viscount Xiang. Frightened and pleased at the same time, Viscount Xiang welcomed Mengtan and repeated salutations to him. The 2 rulers, after having sent Changmengtan away with the promise, called on Earl Qi. On leaving, they met Chi Kuo outside the gate of the commander's headquarters. Wondering at their looks, Chi Kuo went in to see Earl Qi and said to him, The 2 lords in their facial expressions reveal their oncoming insurrection. How? Asked the Earl. They were in high spirits, replied Chi Kuo, and walked with mincing steps. Their attitude was no longer as prudent as before. Your Highness had better take drastic measures in advance. The covenant I made with the 2 lords is very solemn, remarked the Earl. Should Chao be smashed, its territory would be divided into 3 portions. Therefore, I have kept intimate terms with them. They will never deceive me. Moreover, it is 3 years since the Allied forces were entrenched around Qinyang. Now that we will take the city in no time and enjoy the spoils, how comes it that they have different minds? It won't be possible. Better discard the idea and never worry about it. Also, never let it come out of your mouth again. Next morning, the 2 rulers again called on the Earl, went out, and once more met Chi Kuo at the gate of the commander's headquarters. Chi Kuo then went in to see the Earl and asked, Did your Highness pass my words to the 2 lords? How do you know? Asked the Earl. I know because this morning, after they had called on your Highness, when they were going out and saw your servant, their looks shifted and their eyes gazed at your servant. Doubtless they are plotting an insurrection. Your Highness had better kill them. Leave them alone, said the Earl, and never again talk about them. No, said Chi Kuo, You should not leave them alone. You must kill them. If you won't kill them, then cultivate your friendship with them." "How to cultivate my friendship with them?" asked the Earl. In reply, Chi Kuo said, "The counselor of Viscount Xuan of Wei is Chao Chia, and the counselor of Viscount Kang of Han is Tuan Kuei. Both are equally able to shift the policies of their masters. Suppose your highness promise their masters to enfee off the two counselors, each with a county of 10,000 families, after Chao is taken. In that case, the two lords will have no reason to change their minds." "Upon the breakup of Cao," said Earl Chi, "I will have to divide the territory into 3 portions, and if in addition I have to enfee off the two counselors each with a county of 10,000 families, then what I get will be little. That won't do." Finding his advice not taken, Chi Kuo went away and changed his kinsman into the Fu clan. On the appointed night, the Chao clan killed the enemy garrisons of the dikes and led the water to inundate the army of Earl Chi. Earl Chi's troops, on keeping the water out, fell into confusion. Meanwhile, Han and Wei launched a surprise attack from both sides, while Viscount Shang led his forces to raid the front. They defeated Earl Chi's troops by long odds and captured Earl Chi. Earl Chi died, his forces were crushed, his country was divided into 3, and he became a laughingstock of the whole world. Hence the saying, "To keep covetous and self-opinionated fosters the root of self-destruction." What is meant by indulging in women singers? Of old, when Yu Yu was sent by the king of Zheng to pay a courtesy visit to the court of Qin, Duke Mu asked him, saying, "I have heard about the right way of government, but have not yet been able to witness it. I would like to know how and why the intelligent rulers of antiquity won and lost their states." In reply, Yu Yu said, "Your servant happens to have studied it carefully, and found that by reason of their frugality they won their states, and by reason of their extravagance they lost their states. I am at least worthy of asking you, an honorable scholar, about the right way of government. Yet how comes it that you put frugality in your reply to my question?" asked Duke Mu. "Your servant has heard," replied Yu Yu. "Yao, while ruling all under heaven, ate from earthen plates and drank from earthen bowls. Within his dominion, which extended as far as Chiao-Chi in the south, and Yutu in the north, and in the east and the west, as far as the horizons of sunrise and moonrise, sunset and moonset, everybody obeyed him willingly. When Yao gave up the rule over all under heaven, Yu Shun accepted it. Thereupon Shun started making new tablewares. He hewed trees from the mountains and cut them into small pieces, which he first whittled, sawed, and smoothed away the traces of the axe, then lacquered them with varnish and ink, and finally transported them to the palace. Of the wood he made tablewares. Therefore he was regarded by the feudal lords as far more extravagant than his predecessor. And the states that refused to obey him were 13. When Shun gave up the rule over all under heaven and bequeathed it to Yu, Yu made sacrificial wares, which he varnished black outside and painted red inside. He had cushions made of pieces of thin, plain silk, mats made of water oats and hemmed for decoration, cups and decanters embellished with pretty colors, and casks and basins made with ornaments. The extravagance having thus turned from bad to worse, the feudal states that disobeyed were 33. On the downfall of the Xia Hao clan, the Yins took the reins of government. They then constructed big vehicles and made 9 pennants. Their tablewares were carved, cups and decanters were engraved, the walls of the palace were painted white, and the courtyard chalky, and cushions and mats had beautiful designs on them. Such extravagance exceeding that of the predecessors, the states that disobeyed were 53. Thus, the more arts of elegance and refinement the ruling class knew, the less were those willing to obey. Hence your servant says, frugality is the right way. After Yu Yu had gone out, the Duke summoned the officer of the censorate Liao and said to him, I have heard that the presence of a sage in a neighboring country is a constant threat to the enemy countries adjacent to it. Now Yu is a sage. I am worrying about it. What shall I do? In reply, the officer of the censorate Liao said, As your servant has heard, the dwelling of the king of Zheng is so rustic and so remote that he has never heard the music of the central land. Suppose your highness present him with women singers, disturb his state affairs thereby, then ask him to postpone the date of Yu's return, and thereby keep off Yu's remonstration. After the discord between ruler and minister appears, we can start plotting against their state. Right, the duke said, and then ordered the officer of the censorate Liao to take the present of 16 women singers to the king of Zheng, and thereby ask him to postpone the date of Yu's return. The request was granted by the king of Zheng, who was greatly delighted at seeing the women singers. Thenceforth he set up wine feasts, held drinking parties, and spent every day in hearing music. He continued the same throughout the year, till half of his oxen and horses died off. When Yu came back, he remonstrated with the king of Zheng against such misconduct, but the king of Zheng would not listen. At last, Yu left for Qin. Duke Mu of Qin welcomed him, appointed him assistant premier, and asked him about the military strength and topographical features of the land of Zheng. Having secured enough information, he mobilized his army and attacked the country. In consequence, he annexed 12 states and extended his territory 1,000 li farther. Hence the saying, to indulge in women singers and neglect the state affairs forecasts the catastrophe of state ruin. What is meant by leaving home for distant travels? Once upon a time, while Viscount Tiancheng was traveling on the sea and amusing himself, he gave a verbal order to all high officials, saying, Whoever talks about going home shall be put to death. Thereupon Yan Chochu remarked, Your Highness is now traveling on the sea and amusing himself. What can be done in case ministers at home plot against the state? Though you are now enjoying yourself, what will you have when back home? In reply, Viscount Tiancheng said, I have already issued the order saying, Whoever talks about going home shall be put to death. Now that you should have disobeyed my order. So he took up a lance to assail him. Remember in bygone days, said Yan Chochu, Qi killed Quan Lung Peng and Chao killed Prince Pekan. Now, though your highness kills your servant and thus makes him the third martyr in the cause of loyalty, be sure that your servant has spoken in the interests of the whole country and not for himself. So saying, he stretched his neck forward and added, May your highness strike. At once the ruler threw away the lance and urged his carriage to hurry home. 3 days after his arrival home, he heard about some people planning to prevent Viscount Tiancheng from re-entering the state capital. Thanks to Yan Chochu's effort, Viscount Tiancheng finally had the Qi state in his grip. Hence the saying, to leave home for distant travels and ignore remonstrance is the surest way to endanger one's august position at home. What is meant by committing faults and turn no ear to loyal ministers? In bygone days, Duke Huan of Qi called the feudal lords to meet 9 times, brought all under heaven under one rule, and became the first of the 5 hegemonic rulers, and Quan Chung assisted him. When Quan Chung became aged and unable to attend to his duties, he retired to live at his home. One day Duke Huan went to call on him and asked, Uncle Chung is ill at home. If by any unlucky chance you should not be up and doing again, to whom should the state affairs be entrusted? In reply, Quan Chung said, Your servant is old and hardly worth consulting. Nevertheless, your servant has heard. Nobody knows the ministers better than the ruler does, just as nobody knows the sons better than the father does. Suppose your highness select one according to his judgment. How about Pao Shuya? Asked the duke. No, replied Quan Chung, for Pao Shuya is by nature rigorous, self-opinionated, and stubborn-minded. Rigorous, he is likely to be violent towards the people. Self-opinionated, he cannot win the hearts of the people. If he is stubborn-minded, nobody is willing to work under him, and all are not afraid of him. Therefore he is not the right kind of assistant to the hegemonic ruler. Then how about Shu Tiao? Asked the Duke. No, replied Quan Chung. Such is human nature, indeed, that everybody loves his own body. Now because your highness was habitually jealous and fond of women, Shu Tiao castrated himself for the single purpose of administering the harem. If he could not love his own body, how would he be able to love his master? Then how about Prince Kaifang of Wei? Asked the Duke. No, replied Quan Chung. The distance between Qi and Wei is not more than 10 days' walk. Yet Kaifang, in order to serve your highness and meet his needs, never went home for 15 years to see his parents. Such is against human nature. If he could not hold his parents in affectionate esteem, how would he be so able to hold his master? Well then, how about Yia? Asked the Duke. No, replied Quan Chung. Indeed, Yia was in charge of the tastes of your highness's diet, and finding that what your highness had never tasted was human flesh only, he steamed the head of his son and presented his master with the rare taste. This is what your highness remembers. Nevertheless, such is human nature that everybody loves his own son. Now that he steamed his own son to make food for his master, if he could not even love his own son, how would he be able to love his master? Well then, who will be the right man? Asked the Duke. Xi Peng is he, replied Quan Chung, for he is habitually steadfast in mind and upright towards people, and has few wants but many credits. Indeed, steadfast in mind, he can offer an example to others. Upright towards people, he can be appointed to important office. Having few wants, he will be able to subject the masses, and having many credits, he will be able to make friends with the neighboring states. A man like this is the right kind of assistant to the hegemonic ruler. Suppose your highness employ him. Certainly, said the Duke. More than 1 year later, Quan Chung died, but the Duke did not employ Xi Peng, but passed the reins of government to Shu Tiao. Shu Tiao had handled the state affairs for 3 years already when Duke Huan traveled southward to Tangfu. Thereupon Shu Tiao, leading Yia, Prince Kaifang of Wei, and the chief vassals, launched a rebellion. In consequence, Duke Huan died of thirst and hunger in heavily guarded confinement inside the bedchamber by the south gate. There his dead body lay uncovered for 3 months, until worms crawled outdoors. But why was it that Duke Huan was at last murdered by his ministers, deprived of his high reputation, and laughed at by all under heaven, although his armies had marched everywhere in the world, and he had become the first hegemonic ruler himself? It was because of his fault in turning no ear to Quan Chung. Hence the saying, to commit faults, turn no ear to loyal ministers, and enforce one's own opinions, destroys one's high reputation, and sets people to laugh at one. What is meant by not consolidating the forces within one's boundaries? Of old, when Qin was attacking Yiyang, the Han clan was in imminent danger. Thereupon Kung Chung Peng said to the ruler of Han, "Our allies are not reliable. Is it not the best policy to make peace with Qin through Changyi's good offices? Suppose we bribe Qin with a famous city and join her in her southward campaign against Chu. This will appease our trouble with Qin and defeat her friendship with Chu." "Good," the ruler said, and then ordered Kung Chung to set out westward to make peace with Qin. When the king of Chu heard about this scheme, he felt uneasy, summoned Chen Chen, and said to him, "Peng of Han is going westward to make peace with Qin. What shall we do?" In reply, Chen Chen said, "Qin, after receiving one city from Han, will mobilize her best-trained soldiers and will turn the combined forces of Qin and Han southward against Chu. This is what the king of Qin has sought in his prayer at his ancestral shrine. No doubt they will do Chu harm. Suppose your majesty quickly send out a goodwill envoy to present the ruler of Han with many chariots and precious gifts and say, My country, small as it is, has already mobilized all her forces. I am hoping your great country will display high morale before the Qin invaders and accordingly expects you to send a delegation to our border to watch our mobilization. Han actually sent a delegation to Chu. The king of Chu, accordingly, dispatched chariots and cavalry and lined them up along the northern road. Then he told the Han delegation to inform the ruler of Han that his troops were about to cross the border and enter the territory of Han. The delegation brought back the message to the ruler of Han, who was thereby greatly pleased and stopped Kungcheng from going westward. "No, I should not stop going westward," said Kungcheng, "for Qin is harassing us in reality, while Chu is rescuing us only in name. To listen to the empty words of Chu and make light of the real disaster which Qin is causing is the outset of endangering the country." The ruler of Han would not take Kungcheng's advice, wherefore Kungcheng was angry, went home, and for 10 days never visited the court. The situation at Yiyang became more and more threatening when the ruler of Han dispatched envoys to press for reinforcements from Chu. One envoy followed on the heels of another so closely that their hats and canopies were almost within one another's sight, but all in vain. Yiyang was finally taken, and the ruler of Han became a laughingstock of the feudal lords. Hence the saying, not to consolidate the forces within one's boundaries, but to rely on other feudal lords, causes the country the calamity of dismemberment. What is meant by insulting big powers despite the smallness of one's own state? In bygone days, when Prince Cheng-Er of Qin was living in exile, he once passed through the Chao state. The ruler of Chao made him take off his sleeves and upper coat and looked at him. Shi Fuqi and Shu Chan then attended in the front. The latter said to the ruler of Chao, "As far as your servant can see, the Prince of Qin is not an ordinary man. Your Highness has handled him without mittens. Should he ever get the opportunity to return to his native country and raise armies, he might cause Chao a great harm. Suppose your Highness kill him now." The ruler of Chao took no notice, however. Shi Fuqi went home feeling unhappy, so his wife asked him, "Your Excellency has just come home from outdoors, but has some unpleasant color on the face. Why?" In reply, Shi Fuqi said, "As I have heard, when the ruler has good luck, it will not visit me, but when he has bad luck, it will befall me. Today His Highness summoned the Prince of Qin and accorded him very discourteous treatment. I was attending before him, therefore I have felt unhappy." "As far as I can see," said his wife, "the Prince of Qin will be a ruler of 10,000 chariots, and his followers will be ministers to the ruler of 10,000 chariots. Now that he has been destitute and forced to seek refuge in foreign countries and is passing through, and Cao is treating him so impolitely, if he ever returns to his native country, he will no doubt punish all breakers of etiquette, and then Cao will be the first victim. Why don't you yourself now treat him differently?" "Certainly, I will," replied Fuqi. He, accordingly, put golden pots, covered them with food, placed jades upon them, and at night sent men to present them to the prince. Seeing the messengers, the prince repeated his salutations and accepted the food, but declined the jades. From Cao, the prince entered Chu, and from Chu entered Qin. After he had stayed in Qin for 3 years, Duke Mu of Qin one day summoned all ministers for consultation, saying, "That in bygone days Duke Xin of Qin kept intimate friendship with me. Every feudal lord has heard. Unfortunately, Duke Xian passed away from the body of officials. It is nearly 10 years since. His successors so far have been no good. I am therefore afraid lest this state of continuous chaos should leave their ancestral shrine deserted and deprive their altar of the spirits of land and grain of regular offerings. To make no decision to restore order to the country is not the way to maintain my intimate friendship with them. I am therefore thinking of supporting Cheng-Er and installing him on the throne of Qin. How do you think?" "Fine," replied all the ministers. Thereupon the Duke raised an army of 500 leather-covered chariots, 2,000 good horsemen, and 50,000 foot soldiers, to help Chungar enter Qin and establish him as ruler of Qin. After having been on the throne for 3 years, Chungar raised an army and fell upon Cao. He, accordingly, ordered his men to say to the ruler of Cao, "Seize Shuchan and send him outside the city. His Highness will kill him as an expiatory punishment for his insult of His Highness." He also ordered his men to say to Shifuchi, "My troops are storming the city. I understand very well that formerly you never meant to offend me. Put a sign on the gate of your residential quarters. I will issue a decree ordering the troops not to trespass on it." The people of Cao, hearing about this, brought their relatives into Shifuchi's residential quarters, where upwards of 700 families had safety. This was the effect of his respectfulness to the prince. Thus, Cao was a small state pressed between Qin and Chu. Its ruler was in constant danger as piled eggs are, but he accorded the Prince of Qin such a discourteous reception. This was the reason why his posterity was wiped out. Hence the saying, to insult big powers despite the smallness of one's own country, and take no advice from remonstrance, paves the way to the extinction of one's posterity. Chapter 11. Solitary indignation. Men well versed in the principles of tact are always far-seeing and clearly observing, for if not clearly observing, they cannot discern selfishness. Men able to uphold the law are always decisive and straightforward, for, if not straightforward, they cannot correct crookedness. Ministers who attend to their duties in conformity to orders and fulfill their posts in accordance with laws are not called heavy-handed men. The heavy-handed men would without any order act on their will, benefit themselves by breaking the law, help their families by consuming state resources, and have enough power to manipulate their ruler. Such are the so-called heavy-handed men. Men well versed in the principles of tact, being clearly observing, if listened to and taken into service by the ruler, will discern the secret motives of the heavy-handed men. Men able to uphold the law, being straightforward, if listened to and taken into service by the ruler, will correct the crooked deeds of the heavy-handed men. In short, if these types of men are taken into service, noble and powerful ministers will infallibly fall off the inked string. This is the reason why they and the authorities in charge of the state affairs are bad enemies and unable to coexist. If the authorities concerned take all matters of the state into their own hands, then everybody, whether outside or inside the court, will be bound to become their tool. Thus, unless through their good offices, feudal lords from abroad cannot accomplish any negotiation, wherefore even enemy states praise them. Unless through their good offices, no official in governmental service can advance his career, wherefore the body of officials becomes their tool. Unless through their good offices, the courtiers cannot approach the sovereign, wherefore the courtiers conceal their vices. And unless through their good offices, the allowances of scholars will decrease, and the treatment accorded them will deteriorate, wherefore the learned men speak well of them. These 4 assistances are means whereby wicked ministers embellish themselves. The heavy-handed men cannot be so loyal to the sovereign as to recommend their enemies, and the Lord of men cannot rise above their 4 assistances in such wise as to discern the right types of ministers. Therefore, the more deluded the sovereign is, the more powerful the chief vassals become. In general, the authorities concerned, in relation to the Lord of men, are rarely not trusted and beloved, and, moreover, are his old acquaintances and long-time intimates. To please the sovereign's mind by sharing the same likes and hates with him is, of course, their beaten way of self-elevation. Their posts and ranks are noble and powerful, their friends and partisans are numerous, and the whole country praises them with one accord. Contrary to these, upholders of law and tact, when they want to approach the throne, have neither the relationship of the trusted and beloved, nor the favor of the long acquaintances and old intimates, and, what is still worse, intend to reform the biased mind of the Lord of Men with lectures on law and tact, which altogether is opposed to the taste of the Lord of Men. Naturally, they have to acquiesce in a low and humble status, and, having no partisans, live in solitude and singleness. Indeed, the strange and distant, when contesting with the near and dear, have no reason to win. Newcomers and travelers, when contesting with long acquaintances and old intimates, have no reason to win. Opponents of the sovereign's opinion, when contesting with his supporters of the same taste, have no reason to win. The humble and powerless, when contesting with the noble and powerful, have no reason to win. And a single mouth, when contesting with the whole country, has no reason to win. Confronted with these 5 handicaps, upholders of law and tact, though they wait for a number of years, are still unable to see the sovereign. On the contrary, the authorities concerned, possessed of the advantages of 5 winnings, speak freely to the throne at any time. If so, how can upholders of law and tact distinguish themselves, and when can the Lord of Men realize his own mistakes? Being thus hopelessly handicapped in their equipment, and rendered incompatible with the authorities by force of circumstances, how can upholders of law and tact avoid dangers? Those who can be falsely accused of criminal offenses are censured with state laws. Those who cannot be indicted as criminals are ended by private swordsmen. For this reason, those who clarify the principles of law and tact but act contrary to the sovereign's taste, if not executed through official censure, are infallibly dispatched by private swordsmen. However, friends and partisans who form juntas on purpose to delude the sovereign and twist their words so as to benefit themselves always win the confidence of the heavy-handed men. Accordingly, those who can be accorded the pretext of meritorious services are ennobled with official rank. Those who cannot be accorded any good reputation are empowered through foreign influences. For this reason, men who delude the sovereign and frequent the gates of private mansions, if not celebrated for official rank, are always empowered through foreign influence. In these days, the Lord of Men, without investigating evidence and witness, inflicts censure and punishment upon upholders of law and tact, and without waiting for meritorious services to appear, confers rank and bounties upon friends and partisans of the authorities. If so, how can the upholders of law and tact risk their lives in presenting their ideas to the throne? And how would the wicked ministers discard their private advantages and withdraw themselves from office? Therefore, the more humbled the sovereign is, the more ennobled are the private clans. Indeed, the Yue state was rich and her army was strong. Yet the sovereign of every central state, knowing that she was useless to him, would say, "She is not within the reach of my control." Take, for example, a state at present. However extensive the territory and however numerous the people, if the Lord of Men is deluded and the chief vassals have all powers to themselves, that state is the same as Yue. If the ruler only perceives no resemblance of his state to Yue, but fails to perceive no resemblance of the state out of his control to the state under his control, he never thoroughly understands what resemblance is. People speak of the fall of Qi. Not that the land and cities fell to pieces, but that the Lu clan failed to rule while the Tian clan assumed the ruling power. They speak of the fall of Qin. Not that the land and cities fell to pieces, but that the Qi clan failed to rule while the 6 nobles had all powers to themselves. Today, if chief vassals have the ruling power in their grip and decide on all state policies by themselves, and the sovereign does not know how to recover his prerogatives, it is because the Lord of Men is not intelligent. Whoever catches the same diseases as dead people did cannot survive. Whoever shows the same symptoms as ruined states did cannot exist. Therefore, the present followers of the footsteps of Qi and Qin, even though they want to secure and preserve their states, will find it to be an unattainable task. In general, the difficulty in enacting law and tact is met not only by rulers of 10,000 chariots, but also by rulers of 1,000 chariots. As the attendants of the Lord of Men are not necessarily intelligent, if in estimating new personnel he first takes counsel from men whom he considers wise, and then discusses their words with his attendants, he is talking about wise men to fools. As the attendants of the Lord of Men are not necessarily worthy, if in estimating new personnel he first pays respect to men whom he considers worthy, and then discusses their deeds with his attendants, he is talking about worthies to ruffians. If wise men have to submit their plans for fools' approval, and worthies have to see their deeds estimated by ruffians, men of worthiness and wisdom will feel ashamed, and the ruler's conclusions will be full of fallacies. Among the sovereign's subjects aspiring to official honors, refined men would keep their characters clean, and wise men would advance their careers by improving their eloquence. They cannot please anybody with bribes. Counting on their cleanness and eloquence, they are unable to join governmental service by bending the law. Consequently, refined and intelligent men would neither bribe the attendants nor comply with private requests. The attendants of the Lord of Men are not as upright in conduct as Poi. If they fail to get what they want and receive the bribes they expect, then the refined and intelligent men's merits of cleanness and eloquence will come to naught, while words of slander and false accusation will ensue instead. When merits of eloquence are restricted by the courtiers and virtues of cleanness are estimated by slanderers, then refined and intelligent magistrates will be deposed, while the sagacity of the Lord of Men will be debarred. When the ruler estimates wisdom and virtue, not according to meritorious services, and judges crimes and faults not through the processes of investigation and testimony, but simply listens to the words of the courtiers and attendants, then incapable men will fill up the court, and stupid and corrupt magistrates will occupy all posts. The threat to the ruler of 10,000 chariots is the chief vassals being too powerful. The threat to the ruler of 1,000 chariots is the attendants being too much trusted. Both these threats, indeed, are common to every lord of men. Moreover, whether ministers commit major offenses or the Lord of Men has serious faults, ruler and minister always have mutually different interests. How is this known? In reply, I say, the sovereign is interested in appointing able men to office. The minister is interested in securing employment with no competent abilities. The sovereign is interested in awarding rank and bounties for distinguished services. The minister is interested in obtaining wealth and honor without merit. The sovereign is interested in having heroic men exerting their abilities. The minister is interested in having their friends and partisans effect self-seeking purposes. Accordingly, when the land of the state is dismembered, private families are enriched. When the sovereign is degraded, chief vassals are empowered. In consequence, when the sovereign loses his influence, ministers gain the rule over the state. When the sovereign changes his title into that of a feudatory vassal, the prime minister splits tallies into halves. These are the reasons why ministers attempt to beguile the ruler and further their private interests. Thus, if the sovereign ever changes the circumstances, not even 2 or 3 out of 10 chief vassals of the present age can remain in favor with him. What is the reason, therefore? It is because crimes committed by ministers are serious. Ministers guilty of major offenses must have deceived their sovereign. Such crimes deserve the death penalty. The wise men, far-seeing and afraid of death, never will obey the heavy-handed men. Similarly, the worthies, anxious to cultivate their personal integrity and ashamed of joining the wicked ministers in deceiving the sovereign, never will obey the chief vassals. That being so, the adherents and dependents of the authorities concerned, if not stupid and ignorant of the impending calamity, must be corrupt and mind no wickedness. The chief vassals, holding such stupid and corrupt men under control, cooperate with them in deceiving the sovereign from above and collect spoils from below. Their friends and partisans exploit the masses of the people, associate for treasonable purposes, bewilder the sovereign by unifying their words, and disturb the gentry and commoners by breaking the law. In so doing, they incline the state towards danger and dismemberment, and the sovereign towards hardship and disgrace. Such is a major offense. When ministers are guilty of such a major offense and the sovereign never suppresses them, he is then committing a serious fault. Should the sovereign commit such a serious fault and ministers commit such a major offense, to prevent the state from going to ruin would be impossible. Our audiobook ends here. Thank you for listening. If you want any particular book in this channel, please let us know in the comments.